hopefully this is okay for everyone. So we'll call to order this meeting of the Hamilton Conservation Commission today, March 16th at 6:18 p.m. From the Conservation Commission, we have myself, Lauren Lynch, and Virginia Cookson. And anyone else on the commission online? Let's see. All right, and then I think select board, you guys are good.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. So I'll just really quickly give an overview. And in the room, we've got a couple of people here, so thank you all for coming, making your way out here to talk about this. Give a quick overview of the agenda tonight. So our plan is to go until just 8 p.m. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we'll try and be cognizant of the time. There have been two kind of discussions related specifically to the bylaw leading up to this with members of the public. So I think many of you in the room have been part of those, so you know what the vision is. We're basically discussing a large-scale kind of revision of the text of the bylaw, but in an effort to just bring the bylaw document itself into alignment with the current regulations. So we'll do a really quick overview, kind of Conservation Bylaw 101, what a bylaw is, why it's different from the Wetlands Protection Act, and why we need it. We'll talk about very briefly why an update to the Hamilton Conservation Bylaw is needed, and we have Amy Questle from Town Council here with us to help talk through that and answer any questions that people have about the legal side of this, because that's really a big part of it, is ensuring that the legal language of the bylaw is sufficient to do what it aims to do. And then I'll give a really quick overview of the process that we've taken to date for over the past year and a half in working on updates to this bylaw. And then we'll get into the meat of the conversation, a deep dive into the text itself. And I will caveat up front that that is going to be not boring, I should say, but it's going to be a detailed discussion. We're going to go through section by section. So just so everyone's aware of that, and I'll pull that up on the screen. And that's where we'd really like it to be interactive. I've already integrated feedback that we've gotten, written feedback from about 4 or 5 people who weren't able to make it tonight but submitted comments and line edits. So you'll see that in the comments section, and we'll go through that so that we can discuss comments. Any questions about the overall process? And I see a hand from Kathy Rich Duval. Let me just let you talk, unless this may be left over, I know, from my ask about the visual. All right, nothing from you, Kathy? All right.
No, it was because we couldn't see any screens.
Got it. Can you see? You can see it now, though?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. And actually, one other thing now that I'm thinking of it, in terms of like where we're headed to at the end of the night, we're not going to reach a decision. We're going to just be receiving and documenting all of the feedback that we get tonight. And that's the commission's goal, I think. Well, yes, that's our goal.
That was Kathy Simons, right?
Kathy Simon? No, that was a different person. No. Okay, so folks in the room can't see my screen right now, but you'll be familiar with these slides. I mean, basically just what is a local conservation bylaw? Why do we need it? So at the state level, we have the Wetlands Protection Act. It is a Massachusetts state law that lays out like broad parameters around wetlands protection. And it provides municipalities with the opportunity to develop localized bylaws. And these bylaws are specific to the municipality. They're administered by the local conservation commission, and they must require protections that extend beyond the WPA. They can't just duplicate the WPA, otherwise there's no need for them. And so to get really specific, these bylaws can protect wetlands to a greater degree, or they can recognize and protect resource areas and resource area values beyond those covered in the Act. So in our prior discussions, we talked about how this applies to certain types of vernal pools. For example, here in Hamilton, protecting vernal pools that exist outside of the boundaries of wetlands, and things like the aura, protecting that and recognizing that not just as a buffer zone, but as a resource area itself. And so that's where I'll stay with that for now. What'd you say? Oh, cool. Actually, let me just, okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, we're gonna try a different computer to get the screen share up. Does anybody have any questions about that while we do this technical swap?
Email me your presentation.
Yes.
Do you need anything on mine? You want me to co-host you, or?
Do you have the presentation on a thumb drive or anything like that?
Definitely not.
Okay, perfect. Well, not perfect, but we'll work around it.
Clear answer, at least.
I like the definitive answer there.
I can go,
No, I'm going to email it to Sean right now. Sorry, everybody. You can take a sip of water.
Let me see if I can figure out how to get it out of this laptop here.
because we can make you a co-host or a panelist, and then the screen sharing is right there. Let me see if I can.
All right, so I just sent that to you. So now I'm going to just dive back into it with folks online. All right, so we're back. So that's the bylaw, how the bylaw relates to the WPA, the state law. On the screen, you can see here, this is a picture of the town, a map of the town of Hamilton, and it outlines some of the key water-related features that we have. Just think that this is useful to put into context what we are talking about when we're talking about protecting certified wetlands, certified vernal pools, and then you can also see rivers, lakes, and ponds.
Are you putting it up?
Yeah, it's up here. Everyone online can see it. Sean's working on getting it onto the screen here, but it looks like we will be successful in that in a moment. So again, here, this just shows everyone in red. This shows you the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction under the bylaw. So,
Oh, so you're not logged into the.
No, I'm not logged in.
all right. And then, yeah, and apologies to everyone in the room. So then in terms of, I think this was something, I've added a slide here on the limitations of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Conservation Bylaw, because this came out of the conversations that we have had with members of the public over the past couple of months, just in terms of clarifying activities that are not regulated by the Wetlands Protection Act or the bylaw. These include things like tree maintenance and removal outside of the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction, protection of drinking water quality. I put stormwater in here. There is a caveat. I mean, the stormwater bylaw for the town of Hamilton is administered by the planning board. Of course, projects that come in front of the Conservation Commission intersect with stormwater, but that's another example, kind of like trees here, where we only interact with issues related to that when they're within our jurisdiction. And so, I mean, to me, frankly, I think the name Conservation Commission can be a little bit of a misnomer. It was, honestly, for me before joining, because it's conservation specific to wetlands and wetland resource areas. And yeah, the rest of the list here, I mean, I won't read it out, but just to clarify that the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction is bounded by these two large pieces of legislation. So I think that's really important. So this brings us to why it's important to update the bylaw. And a really key part of that is just to meet current legal requirements. And I want to hand it over to Amy now just to talk through and provide some clarity around the way that the bylaw document interacts with our regulations and the need, therefore, for us to ensure they're speaking to each other properly.
Sure.
That's helpful.
So,
Thanks.
thank you.
And maybe for the sake of the people, yeah, if you could just go over to the podium, thank you.
Thank you. So again, Amy Questle, Town Council. In my practice, I specialize in wetland cases. I served on my Conservation Commission for 13 years. And so with regard to your existing bylaw is a little bit lacking. There are, and so what happens is you have regulations, but your regulations have to stem from a bylaw. And so by having a strong bylaw, you have a lot more flexibility with your regulations. The changes that were made to this bylaw are definitely in line with, for example, with the MACC model bylaw. It's very much it basically tracks the MACC model bylaw. The good thing here is that you guys had some pretty robust regulations already. And so you were able to take sections of your regulations and put them into the bylaw, which when I have to defend a case in court, I am always much more confident when I have something in a bylaw than when I have something in a regulation. So, for example, I have a town on the Cape that consistently wins lawsuits because in their bylaw they have a no disturb zone, and it's spelled out in their bylaw, not just their regulations. Which even if it's just in regulations, you know, I can still argue that, but the fact that it's in their bylaw makes the case that much stronger. The other thing is that it's also a lot more clear for the public to have a bylaw that basically states, here's the jurisdiction, here's what you can do. If you do fall under the jurisdiction, here's what you need to do, meaning, you know, file for a permit, you know, how, and it also keeps, it satisfies both sides. It keeps the applicants, it gives them a roadmap, but it keeps the Conservation Commission, it gives them a roadmap. So for example, you have 21 days to issue or to open up a hearing. When the hearing closes, you have 21 days to close. Those are exactly in line with the Wetland Protection Act. The Home Rule Amendment allows you to enact a bylaw that's more stringent. However, you are also allowed to hold a hearing under the Wetland Protection Act and your wetland bylaw. So this isn't going to create extra hearings for an applicant. It's not going to create extra work for the commission. And so to do that, we have to be in line with the Wetland Protection Act in certain aspects, such as when to act. And your biggest deviation right now with your existing bylaw, your biggest deviation is that your orders of conditions are only good for 1 year. And under the Wetland Protection Act, they're good for 3 years. That is problematic. And so, you know, honestly, as an applicant, I'm not even sure that I would know that it was up in a year.
That has been a problem for us before. Yeah, people don't know.
I don't even know if I would know. So,
What we usually do, though, is when we issue the order of conditions, the applicant is generally there, and they will say something, or we will say, shall we make the order of conditions under the bylaw, shall we have it run concurrent with the state at 3 years? So sometimes we do that, but you're right, it needs to be changed.
yeah.
I mean, we do address it.
Yes, it definitely does. So, I have, you know, I have reviewed the bylaw. I did supply comments a while ago, and you know, I would encourage you to consider adopting this bylaw. I think it's going to make everybody, it's going to make everything clearer for everyone.
Thanks, Amy. And we're going to get into the details, but does anyone have any just high-level questions for Amy or for any of us at this juncture? Just
Well, I
raise your
may
hand
have
if you do. Anyone in the room?
I have comments, but I guess I'll hold them for now.
Yeah, let's hold.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Great, okay. So then, before we dig into the document itself, just a really quick reiteration of where we've come in this process. So, frankly, I think a large part of the reason that the bylaw is now out of alignment with kind of best practices, just that it has been a long time since it's been updated. So the core bylaw components come from the 1980s and 90s. In the early 2000s, 2010s, the bylaw regulations were developed, but there was not at that time of their development a revisitation of the bylaw itself, and that is why there are some elements in the regulations that don't have tiebacks into the bylaw, which, as Amy said, is an issue. So then, prior to myself joining the commission in around 2020, there was a proposal floated to update the bylaw. I know, Amy, you were involved in that. Rosie Kennedy was involved in that as well. And then we kind of re-picked up and really put some emphasis on moving this forward beginning in January 2022. So Town Council flagged the the disconnection between the bylaw and the regulations, and we began the process of discussing within the commission during open meetings. Throughout February through September, we spent a lot of time, I will say, working through different versions and revising the bylaw. It was shared across many of the town boards, as noted here, the Select Board, Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, DPW. What is FC? I'm forgetting. FinCom, thank you. We've had some conversations with FinCom. Also brought in wetland scientists, so the folks who are on our calls frequently reviewing projects, presenting projects, to garner feedback from them, and then the general public. In October, we brought the bylaw to the special town meeting, but it was tabled as a result of some concerns that were raised then, and we will talk about those again tonight because, I think some of the questions, it's really important to talk through and make sure there's clarity. And then since January of this year, we've had a couple of meetings to garner more public feedback. Well, actually, we haven't started that process, but just to talk with the public about what the bylaw is and why we are revising it, all leading to tonight, hoping to get and discuss the feedback that people have. And so then the next step will be April, the date of town meeting is the 1st?
First.
Yeah, April 1st at town meeting. Our hope is to vote on April Fool's Day, to vote on the proposed bylaw revision. So here I just want to show you, this is a skeleton outline of what the bylaw itself looks like. So it has 15 sections or kind of chapters. It's a 13-page document, and that is a expansion in terms of word count from what it currently is, which is a 2-page document. And I know that is a change. And as Amy mentioned, this is based off of and structured around the MACC, Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, model bylaw, which is best practice, kind of a amalgamation of content from various communities within Massachusetts that have developed bylaws and learned things through trial and error, and determined what is necessary to make a really strong and robust bylaw. And it's been reviewed by a number of experts. So we thought it was a really useful framework for us to build our bylaw off of. And in doing a review of other neighboring towns, many of them structure their bylaws off of this model. So it's tried and true in that regard. I've just kind of bolded 7 of the sections that I think our discussion will likely focus on tonight, just because this is where the majority of the comments that we've received to date have been concentrated. So I think, recognizing that we have like an hour and a half to cover a lot of ground, I would just encourage us to try and remain focused as much as possible. But I do want to give everyone a chance to provide comments and feedback as possible. And I've just put the arrow next to regulations just because this is a key section of this document, as it creates that linkage out between the way that the bylaw and the regulations speak to each other. So here, this is a wordy slide. You don't need to read all of it. This is like specific pieces of feedback that we've received so far. And I just put this here, we can post this presentation after the fact, but I want to show on the next slide, these broadly, I've bucketed all of that feedback into 2 broad types of feedback. One camp of reviewers tend to say that the proposed revisions don't go far enough to protect the town's natural resources. In discussions that we've had, there's a lot of concern around the commission's role or lack of role in protecting water quality, protecting trees, agricultural resources, and then kind of questions around the way that the Conservation Commission and its jurisdiction intersect with other boards in town, like the Board of Health, for example, is one that came up. In the other camp, we've gotten a number of comments that say that the proposed revisions are too strict. There's comments related to a preference to keep elements in the rules and regulations there and not integrate them into the bylaw as we have done. Comments around this saying that moving things into the bylaw diminishes the commission's flexibility and makes the bylaw too long. So that's feedback that we have gotten. And then this one suggesting to remove certain terms that are not relevant locally. There are some pieces of the bylaw that come from the model. One example is the comment on shell fisheries, I'll say. And I think that's very open for discussion. We'll get to it when we get to it as to whether there is harm in keeping that there if things change. I mean, land changes over time. There are freshwater mussel species, or if we just, strike it because it's not relevant. So those are the broad buckets of feedback that we have gotten. And then I think this is the last slide before we get into the bylaw document itself. Just to let you know, the bylaw that we bring to town meeting, our primary effort is to ensure that we have a legally defensible, well-structured, organized bylaw that codifies the goals and the regulations and kind of provides clarity and ensures that the commission is able to act in the way that it has been acting for the past 20 years. Clarifying that we are not proposing large changes to the commission's jurisdiction, the commission's power beyond, anything beyond what is in the current regulations. That being said,
What's number 3? I don't see it.
I guess that it should be renumbered to 1, 2,
Okay,
3,
that's
4,
fine.
5. No, it's a good question.
no,
I think
just-
there is no number 3. Virginia asked where number 3 is, and there is no number 3.
It's just to test you, Virginia. So we're just making sure you're paying
I passed the
attention.
test then.
So I think
You won.
to clarify, we are expecting that there will be feedback that we receive tonight that is something the commission will want to chew on and think about for a longer time for a potential future update. I think, this is a living document that we expect should and will get updated going into the future. So we are going to keep a parking lot of ideas and comments that people provide to continue discussing into maybe a phase 2 future-looking revision of the bylaw. So I do want people to know that, if we park an idea or a comment tonight, it's not that we are saying, no, we will never think about that. It's just that we have a limited scope, or we have decided to have a limited scope in this effort at this time. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. So, there's just a beautiful picture, and I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a second while I pull up the bylaw document, and if anyone has it, it's that very colorful version that has been posted to the town website, and it is intended to be helpful for everyone to see where the revisions are coming from. And so I'm just gonna pull that up here. I'm gonna send it to Sean so he can get it on the
I got
screen
this
for
off our
us.
site.
And if you have a printed copy, yeah, that's
No, I got without the comments, got it off our site.
Yes, I didn't put yes, that's good. The color-coded one is on our
Yeah.
site. The comments I did not post, but we'll pull those up now. Okay, just send it to you. All right, so can everyone online see the Word document? You can just raise a hand. Okay, thanks, Jamie. All right, and so what I'm gonna do is, actually, could someone else monitor the comments? Do you have, okay, yeah, just because I don't have room on my screen to really look at them, but I want to make sure that we,
Yeah, I can kind of hover over here on the side.
okay,
They're
thanks.
just really small.
Okay. And if you have a comment that you would prefer to vocalize, please do. I don't want this to be a monologue here. So I'm just going to allow everyone to talk or give everyone the capacity to talk. So, mute yourself unless you are intending to talk. Sorry, Heather, I think I asked you to unmute. All right. And actually, can I just, can I get a show of hands from, and it's fine if you haven't, but just from people online and in the room, if you've actually looked through the color-coded document that's online? It's totally fine if you haven't, I'm just curious. Okay,
No, I haven't done the color code, I just did the regular.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we can dive right in. So section 1, purpose, just to clarify, this section does exist in the current bylaw. And I've flagged here some of the kind of differences, like it lacks references to the aura in the current bylaw. It lacks references in terms of wetlands resource area values that are protected to water quality, habitat, and agriculture. And it lacks a reference to home rule authority. And I've included the text of the current bylaw on the side. I'm not going to read through that, but what I am going to read through are the comments that we've received and then open it up for other folks to add to these comments. So we had a comment here around suggesting adding aquifers as resource area values. And I mean, this speaks exactly to the comments and questions that we got around the commission's role in protecting drinking water supplies. And I mean, Amy, I actually might just ask you to jump in terms of like what you see other commissions doing. My understanding is that that is not within our capacity to have jurisdiction over.
So that is correct, because this is a general bylaw. This will be reviewed by the Attorney General. The Attorney General has to make sure that there's no conflict with state law with regard to this. So under section 310 CMR 21, which are the drinking water regulations, the Commonwealth's drinking water regulations, jurisdiction is not extended to the Conservation Commission. So I think there would be a problem with the Attorney General's approval of that.
Okay. That's really helpful. And actually, yeah, just so everyone knows, so I'm going to just keep a documented list of the comments, the feedbacks, the discussion that we have, and we will make this available. I'll clean it up, but we'll make it available.
You want anything at all from the commission right now?
So my thought, yes.
Just about agriculture. That
Yeah.
We don't make decisions on agriculture, so, saying that, the value of it, we don't need to mention it. Do you have an exception to the rule?
So you would like to see that struck?
I think it's referred further as the fact that it's addressed as being not part of the, of our jurisdiction. And it usually references it by the state act that does address it. And I do wish I remembered the number, but I
Yeah.
do not. And that's mentioned that, agriculture is mentioned and saying that it's covered by, and,
Yeah. I mean, actually, Amy, I'm going to ask you to speak on this as well, just because I know that came specifically from the MAC model. And I'm just curious we're not saying we're doing anything about agriculture, but I think there is a recognition that there are values provided by wetlands resource areas to support agriculture.
Correct. So under 40A Section 3, agriculture is exempt from zoning in certain situations. There's not a blanket exception, but in certain situations it can be exempt from zoning. Agriculture is important here because you do have agricultural activities within jurisdiction, and the state regulations at 310 CMR 10.04 give you a roadmap as to how you can regulate agricultural activities within your jurisdiction. The biggest agricultural use within a wetland are cranberry bogs. So it is definitely an interest that I would recommend keeping
Okay, yeah.
Could you give an example of where it would be in our jurisdiction?
We've got Iron Ox Farm over next to the Patton Homestead. So
Yeah.
that's probably jurisdictional.
I don't know what you're talking about, what?
Next to Patton Homestead
Yeah,
is a farm, Iron Ox Farm. And that land, as far as I know, there's some of that land that would be jurisdictional. I don't know if the operations of the farm down there are, but if they were to expand operations, if I'm remembering correctly, they might well be falling into that. And the farm stand down at the top of Tobacco Road, that field, has a history of agricultural use, and that's jurisdictional.
but we don't
No, but,
control it. I mean, it's there and we have to consider
right, I
it
mean, they
for
would have to
the
do
fact it's
something,
there in our way.
they would have to do something under the WPA, so,
Yeah,
Well,
all right.
Find the right spot.
go
Yeah, oh yeah, sorry, Sean's trying to coordinate yeah. So, okay, the next comment we had here was just around the inclusion of shell fisheries in this section, and valid question, is it irrelevant to Hamilton? So just to clarify, one argument for keeping this is that, there's no harm in it being here. Another argument is that there are freshwater mussels, so, I mean,
they're in this town.
yes. But I'd love to hear feedback from people. This was raised by two different people, like if there's a strong feeling or preference, and maybe after members of the public, if any comments, Amy, your guidance would be helpful here, thoughts? Yeah,
Would it change into freshwater shellfish?
yeah, that's a good suggestion. Any other thoughts? And I don't see any. Yeah, Virginia?
Yeah. No, it's for phase two. Recreation values is in the current, regs. So
Yep, and
it
that's
stays.
included here, yep.
It stays.
Yep. Okay,
I think
Yeah.
the reason to keep it in is because it's all part of the ecosystem. We don't know what we
yeah, I
Okay.
understand that
Yeah,
argument.
comment for the agriculture is, it's depending on where you put it in what section. Okay, in the explanatory sections toward the beginning for our jurisdiction.
Right.
That's why that can go in there, but it would show that we don't actually address it later in examples or anything, because it just doesn't come up. However, I do want you to know that we have met with some people in town who have horses, and there's big debate over whether it's a horse farm or a farm or not. But aside from that, it had to do with manure and the fact that they, where the paddocks are near wetlands. And we had actually got together with people and had an agreement on how they would how often they'd collect it and where they'd store it and how they would do that. And so we do deal with farm, if you consider a horse farm
Yep,
as that.
okay,
And we did it as a friendly basis. We just got a hold of them and did it.
yeah. Okay, that's useful. Amy, do you have any additional comments on shell fisheries?
No, I would put in,
Yeah.
where, the freshwater is fine.
Yeah.
I'll modify it.
Okay. All right, and then the last item in this section that there was a comment on, which I thought was a good comment. So Gordon Glass, I see, is on the call. Thank you, from Johnson and Bernstein. Just noted that, the term community comes up a couple of times throughout, but is not defined. I think that it's useful to define that term. I mean, the term references the town of Hamilton.
Yes. I think you should
Yeah.
define it somewhere. Yeah. Like you could put in definitions,
Yeah. All right, so we can add that as a
unless, of course,
consideration.
we want to consider the fact that as the community, if it's not mentioned in the regulations right now, it shouldn't be in this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly
Come right up to
straightforward,
that
and I think it's
mic right there.
useful to
If you wanna,
define.
if you wanna add, just come right up to the podium.
Oh, I was just gonna
Sorry, just
Just
because
so that
there's
people
people
online
listening,
can
they
hear,
can't
yeah.
hear you at home.
I know it feels
little awkward, yeah.
unnecessary with the.
Just say your name and
This is
you're good
like
to go.
definitely not podium worthy.
Everything is.
Okay, I was just, rather than go through the trouble of defining a term, you could just substitute the word community for town of Hamilton.
Yeah, that's another option. Thank you. All right, so that is the extent of comments we had in purpose section, unless anyone has other comments. And I promise the comments will get more, there will be more discussion, so don't feel, okay, we're gonna keep on going then. So section 2 on definitions. Again, an overarching comment is that this section does exist in the current bylaw, but it is very short. We only define person.
We define alter, it's a whole page, page and a half,
Yes.
in our regulations.
In the regulations,
Not
that's the
regula-
issue, that
not
most
in the
of these
bylaw.
terms are defined, and
Yeah.
that is a very critical
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah.
So the only
Exactly.
term defined in the bylaw is person, whereas
Well, alter is
Yeah,
there
there-
too, but it doesn't define it.
doesn't define. And so actually, this is something I want to just flag, and I should have said this before. The colors here, and it's noted on every page, demonstrate where this text comes from, which I think is really important. So the blue text for the purpose section, you'll see it comes from the model bylaw. The purple text here, the bulk of the definitions come from our current regulations. So, this has not been wholesale developed new by any means. It's a matter of coordinating the documents and ensuring alignment. So as you see here, many of these definitions come from our current regulations. There is some language here in blue that is woven in from the MACC model. So I'll just go through the comments that we've received. Question here, what is the state aura limit? 50 feet, 100 feet, why? So just to clarify, there is no state aura. This is a new term, or a new, not a new term, other towns use it, but this is one of the differentiating factors of our bylaw as opposed to the Wetlands Protection Act. So the state law, what WPA recognizes a 100-foot buffer zone, years ago, in 2006, when the commission developed the regulations, they defined the term aura as a resource area. And that is a really important associated upland resource area, an area that expands 100 feet horizontally from the outward boundary of any of the following: freshwater wetlands, marshes, wet meadows. I'm not going to read them all. The key reason for defining this here and for defining it as a resource area is that it is a different thing for the Conservation Commission to protect a resource area than it is to protect a buffer zone, and that is really important. And so there's no change, and I want to clarify this, there's no change to how the aura is defined in this version of the bylaw than how it is defined in the current regulations. It's a matter of bringing that definition into the bylaw. So yeah, as I stated in the comment here, the 100-foot aura definition aligns with the current Hamilton regulation definitions. Any questions on that?
Lauren, at some point, I think Amy should give a quick educational perspective on the use of definitions in the bylaw versus use of definitions in the regs.
Sure.
And just sort of how they matter, and, the fact that regulations, we can change a little bit more willy-nilly, whereas bylaws really lock things into place.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah,
we get to the
let's-
end, or
yeah.
maybe
I mean, now is a good time for that since we're going through the definitions. If I feel like you may just want to sit over here or something.
Brian stole my thunder. He said it exactly how it is. If, like I said earlier, if it's in the bylaw, it's a lot stronger. And again, just for, for ease of reference for the public, it's there. It's in the bylaw. It is particularly helpful to have the aura defined in the bylaw because, again, with a buffer zone under the state act, a buffer zone is not a resource area. So having this in the bylaw creates a new resource area, and that new resource area is much more easily defendable now that it's in the bylaw. With regard to regulations, Brian is correct. Regulations can be changed at a meeting of the Conservation Commission, provided that the meeting has been advertised, and that's it. So a bylaw can obviously only be changed at town meeting. So it does carry a lot more weight.
And I also just want to be clear, going off of that, like, that the aura definition, as I mentioned, has been utilized by and in practice with how the Conservation Commission protects land and engages with members of the public since the origination of the regulations. And so I think what I'm trying to say is there won't be a change in the way that the commission acts with applicants or is like suddenly imposing all of these new, more stringent protections. This is simply codifying the actions that the commission has been engaging in for the past 15 years. And I don't think there's ever been, and Virginia, you have been on the commission for much longer than I, like an issue with the aura. I mean, the commission is a very collaborative, historically, organization working with members of the public to protect.
No one, as far as I can remember, no one's has taken an issue with the fact that the commission considers the buffer zone the aura, and that we have been treating it like a resource as it's described in the regulations for years, and no one has had a problem with it that I can remember. By the way, just for the people, because sometimes little things can help, you had a great description. You said that a bylaw is actually a what? Or is that the what?
Oh, yeah, the bylaw protects, the bylaw establishes the what, and the regulations explain the how.
Yes.
Brian actually.
So, right, so that's why you have both a bylaw and regulations, because
Yeah.
bylaw is just a law, and the regulations tell you how to apply the law.
Yep. Yep, I think that is a really useful way to
I
think
mean,
about
I think it makes it easier for people to understand
Yeah,
as we bounce back and forth between terms. That's
yeah,
all.
thank you. All right, so the next comment here we have is a comment saying by shifting the burden of, by shifting this burden from the rules and regulations to the bylaw, it changes the tone and cost of how applicants might need to satisfy this change.
Where are we?
So this is, I'm just gonna read the term, but burden of proof.
What page are we on?
This is page 2, number
okay, yep,
3.
I see it, yep.
Meaning that the applicant
Yep.
shall have the burden of proving by a preponderance of credible evidence that the work proposed in the application taking place anywhere within a resource area, including the aura, shall not have an unacceptable, significant, and/or cumulative effect upon the wetland values protected by the bylaw. Failure to provide adequate evidence that the work proposed in the application shall not have an unacceptable, significant, and/or cumulative effect upon the wetland values protected by this bylaw shall be sufficient cause for the commission to deny a permit or grant a permit with conditions. So I just want to be clear that this definition of burden of proof is not any different from the Wetlands Protection Act's burden of proof. And simply, in reiterating that definition here ensures that we apply the same definition to the resource areas as defined by the bylaw. So I actually don't think that this changes anything in terms of cost of how applicants might need to satisfy. And Amy, I just want your thoughts on that. Okay, yeah, sorry.
We're in purple, so you know nothing's changed.
Yeah, it will be.
You mean you don't like getting all that exercise up and down, up and down?
Afraid I'm probably going to trip or something. So, no, there's no difference.
And Amy, just make sure the mic is kind of pointed like
It's
Lauren's
green,
right at.
so that means it's on, right?
Yeah, you just want to point it right at you.
Oh, okay.
It's a-
No, in my opinion, there's no difference. This is the same burden of proof as the Wetland Protection Act. So the applicant, because the applicant comes to you under the Wetland Protection Act and under the bylaw, they would have to prove that. They would have to satisfy that burden of proof in any event.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
That's what happens when you actually make out your application and the plans and everything. That would be included. If you fill out your
Right.
notice of intent, that's asked for there, so it's not an extra.
Yeah, exactly. So the next comment is with regard to the defining, within the definition of freshwater wetlands, how you identify and define a freshwater wetland, and a question around that 50% figure. How well established is this 50% threshold to determine wetlands? Shouldn't it be up to wetlands experts, is the comment. The response, my initial response is that that threshold is the same as in the Wetlands Protection Act on page 205, so that's where this comes from. Yeah. All right. On the next page, we have a comment, item number 5, around GMOs. And a question generally, I mean, it's a fair point. GMOs are not used anywhere in the document, so is there a rationale for including this term in the document? It's simply a definition saying genetically modified seeds, plants, and microorganisms are those organisms primarily used in agriculture, which are created through the technique of artificial gene splicing.
It is in our regulations under definition. GMOs.
Yes, exactly, and that's where this comes from. So that's the purple, yes, so it comes from our regs, and I guess the question is more so, do we need it there at all? Because we are not using that definition anywhere. It's an open question for the group.
Well, that's like saying, should we also have, well, I mentioned pesticides and herbicides that we don't really want them to use.
You can't, under state law, under the Wendell case, that's preemption. It's the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture that controls pesticides. There's the Bloom case, so the SJC determined that local communities cannot regulate
Pesticides. So for GMOs, I mean, and just
we
to
could
be,
reference it as this is the state law.
but to be clear, this term is not used anywhere in the document. I see the argument for
What do
not
you mean
having
used?
it. We don't,
there.
well, it's like, why do we define something if
You
we
don't have
don't
in the
use it in the document? We don't
Well,
ever reference
I do know
it
that
there. I don't see.
Almost every hearing we have, we make sure that they know that they're not allowed to use pesticides and
We're not
herbicides.
talking about pesticides and herbicides, though. We're just talking about GMOs.
Oh, GMOs.
My 2 cents would be, I think you'd
Yeah.
take it out because
I
you don't
agree.
use it anywhere else in the document.
Yeah.
It's superfluous, really. It just adds
Yeah.
confusion if someone says, well, it's here, but where else is it in the document?
Right.
So,
Anybody feel strongly against that? And again, we're not making decisions, but I'm just trying to get the feedback from.
But could, Jeannie Moran, Garfield Avenue. It seems like it should be in the documents, because couldn't GMOs affect the wetlands? Is there-
I'm with you on that one. I think it's important. I think it's
I
really
mean,
important.
if it's not in there, maybe it should be, is I guess what I'm trying to say. What? I don't know.
Well, I think that it's a accepted definition. So
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
defined in the bylaw because it's an accepted definition anywhere. Just by not defining it doesn't mean that they
Right, it's
There's
not-
no
just go
stance that the
everywhere.
commission
Ambiguous.
has or no
Right.
suggested action on how the commission would deal with GMOs in the document. And, you know, your comment noted that maybe that is something for future discussion to discuss. But yeah, at this time, it's more so, why is there a reason to include a particular definition there is a definition of it that is universally agreed upon, but that does not play into any powers of the commission.
I think it might, again, just confuse the people that might be reading through it, that we're trying to connect, make sure that when we enforce the stuff in that regulations is talked about in the bylaw, so that you have that connection and can enforce it. So if you don't have something in there, you can't enforce it. That's how I think
Yes.
people think. And if you can explain why that, in this case, that doesn't apply, it would help.
right? I mean, I guess for me, and this is going to sound a little silly, but we're not trying to regulate tuna fish sandwiches, so why should we define a tuna fish sandwich in the definitions, right? So, you know, I know we're talking GMOs, but there's no other thing in the bylaw that we're proposing that has GMOs
I'm not
in it. And
disagreeing, I'm
Yeah.
simply
yeah,
trying
like
to...
Amy said, it's a term that everyone knows. We don't need to define it. So.
Well, hi, I'm Darcy Dale, Woodbury Street. I think it's forward-thinking to put something in there, because we're not, there'll be only be more and more of these things coming on the market, and there'll be less and less control. So I think it would be, it's foresight to mention it, and I think we should consider, if not now, at some point we're going to have to consider it, because I believe it's going to become ubiquitous, and we've got to protect our natural world. So that would be my advice, and I'm a biologist by trade.
Thank you, Darcy. I think, to me, a question that I then have is, like, if we our list of definitions could become very comprehensive, and to me, it would make sense to, if there's a particular way that the town would like to propose that the commission were to regulate issues that intersect with GMOs, we would want to have that argument laid out and included at the same time that we define it in the bylaw document, so that there is a connection. To me, just defining a defining a term right now, but without having a way to act on that, both kind of, it just takes up space. And for people who are in the camp of like the bylaws trying to do too much and trying to sneak in things, it could give a perception of like, where is this going, without having a very clear follow-up, is a thought that I have.
Right, and I think, not to dismiss Darcy's comment,
Yeah.
this could be something that you could do in rules and regs after the fact and not in the bylaw, because like
It's a living document. Yeah, yeah.
In the regs, I think they were put in there because when the regs, because they were many years ago, that's when GMOs started to pop up in the news and stuff, so I think that's may have
it's a carryover
influenced,
from that, maybe, yeah.
But to that point, actually, Virginia, this is the point that you're making, is if there is a desire to like articulate what the commission stance is in the regulations, the term, in my understanding, would need to be defined in the bylaw. Unless it's a universally
Well,
accepted.
at the moment,
which
it's
it
only,
is.
I've never seen this in
yeah,
a
it's
Never-
actually,
yeah. That's a clearer question.
regs or a bylaw.
Okay, so just to be clear.
actually, it's only in our regs at the minute.
Yeah,
so.
okay, so I just want Amy
No,
to
I-
restate that, to be clear for the record, that you said you've never seen
I have
GMOs
never.
defined.
I have never.
Okay.
Well, no, it's been around a while.
Okay.
So if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If you look down on number 6, growing season. Growing season is that, right, the town of Hamilton is defining that as March 15th to October 15th. The town of Wenham could define that as March 1st to October 1st. If you go to land subject to storm flowage, land subject to inundation, can include vernal pools. Other definitions do not say that. So permits, you can have, they can be orders of conditions or determinations of applicability. Some bylaws only refer to orders of conditions, only DAs. They don't refer to it as permits. So these are terms that have been, they're more detailed and modified by this bylaw. GMO is a universal definition.
Right.
It's not necessary.
Yeah.
Right, the other ones
So
are clarifying.
the other
the
five
kind of
are
terms, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's useful.
At least this growing season does come up for us, for people who are doing that replication. That seems to be happening more and more. And there's usually a two-year growing season, so we do refer to that.
Yeah. So just to be clear too, for a question, this the orange text is, again, text that is in the current bylaw, so that's why it's orange. Let's see, a comment here. So here in the definition of vernal pools, there are a few sentences. The comment is, should the lesson or education be in the text of the bylaw? Is there a significance or a reason for embedding? And yeah, my read through of this, I understand that comment. So basically, we've defined vernal pools, saying such areas are presumed to be significant to the wildlife and wildlife habitat interests of this bylaw. The presumption of significance can exist in the absence of certification of the Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife and whether or not the vernal pool is located outside wetlands. I think that's the critical part, is whether or not the vernal pool is located outside of wetlands. Then the subsequent sentences go on to articulate the benefits of vernal pools. You the surrounding vegetation and trees are vital to a vernal pool with canopy and other plant life, eventually providing the dead leaves that spark the energy transfer in the food chain. Bacteria and other organisms feed on the detritus and decomposing organisms and add important nutrients to the water. Studies have shown that the removal of vegetation or disturbance of these areas, which range from 750 to 1,200 feet from the vernal pool, can wipe out the vernal pool population. That seems a little bit superfluous.
I would move all that to your regulations.
Yeah.
I agree.
Good, you can stay where it started from.
Yes. Okay.
So from the surrounding vegetation down to the end?
Yes.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, great. So then a comment here. Okay, a comment here, just general to this definition of vernal pool. So are Hamilton's definition of vernal pools criteria in sync with the state definitions? How are our vernal pools different, and why might they need greater protection? We've said this a few times, but just to be clear, the definitions are in sync. It's just a matter of the fact that our definition of vernal pools expands to include vernal pools that are outside of wetlands specifically. So it's not about Hamilton's vernal pools being special. It's just about protecting vernal pools that are not in wetlands.
Hey, Lauren.
Yeah.
Just, I may have missed this already.
Yep.
But in the definitions, we have a lower limit for a wetland, which I believe is 1,000 square feet.
Yep.
And so an isolated wetland of 1,000 square feet is going to be bylaw jurisdictional, but not WPA jurisdictional. And a vernal pool of 780 square feet would be non-jurisdictional if not for the language you just went through.
Yep.
So that's why vernal pools can be really, really small, and that's why we're doing that, because a small isolated wetland is one thing, but a small isolated vernal pool, ecologically speaking, is a whole other ball of wax.
And again, to be-
limit to 200 square feet, though, nothing smaller.
Yeah, and to be clear, as you can see in the text, all of the purple text, this comes from Hamilton's current regulation, so there is no change to the way that these areas are defined or engaged with from how they are currently. All right, so then section 3, jurisdiction.
I got a comment on vernal pool.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to point out that the regulations are law as well. I know lawyers like to see things differently. The state certainly doesn't see the bylaw or the Wetlands Protection Act, which would correspond to our bylaw, as being anything stronger than the regulations. You can see that from the length. I mean, the State Wetland Protection Act is 18 pages long. The regulations, this 310 CMR 10 point whatever, is 246 pages long. And anytime anyone has to refer to the state law, they refer to the regulations, the 310 CMR. You see that referenced all the time. You don't see the Wetlands Protection Act except as just sort of a general category. But all the detail is in the wetlands regulations, not in the act itself. And that's true in Hamilton right now too, as far as the vernal pool goes. The critical distinction between putting it in the bylaw versus putting it in the regulations where it is right now is that you put it in the bylaw, it's cast in concrete. You can't change it anytime soon. I think there's like a 10-year limit somewhere in there if you wanted to change it, and it has to go to
I just want to clarify on that. There's not. You can.
Well,
bring the
I've heard
bylaw. Yeah. Well, Town Council, could I just ask you to clarify on that?
Yeah, but
There is no limit in terms of how frequently you can update a conservation bylaw. I think zoning bylaws may have different.
No, there's no limit. You can change it at your annual town meeting, at a special town meeting, with a zoning bylaw, with a zoning amendment. If a zoning amendment is voted down at town meeting and the planning board did not recommend it, you could go back to the planning board, but you have to wait 2 years.
Okay.
If the planning board approved it and then town meeting voted it down, you can come back, provided that the planning board approves it.
Got it.
It's very confusing, but
Yeah.
at the most,
And
it's
that's
2
the
years.
zoning,
And
yeah.
that's zoning only. This is a general bylaw.
Yeah. Okay, I
But
I
it-
wanted
yeah.
to clarify because I think that's useful. But
And
sorry.
it has to go to town meeting and stuff,
Yeah.
which is much more stringent than our.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Continue, George.
But it's still true that you can change the regulations much easier than you can the bylaw.
Right.
Correct.
And if new information comes up, or you have a different view on something that's in the regulations, you can easily change it. If it's stuck in the bylaw, you're stuck, basically.
Yeah.
And what's in the vernal pool information, what's up on it,
Yep.
was on the screen there, is not very good. It really needs to be changed. If you stick it in the bylaw, then it's stuck.
Okay, I just want to be clear, though, when we talk about the function of the bylaw and the function of the regulations, because what I'm hearing you say is that they serve the same function, and again, my understanding, and I'd invite town council to clarify, is that we need to define what the scope of the commission's jurisdiction, what we are talking about, what the commission is able to protect and weigh in on in the bylaw. And then we can articulate and expand on how that is done in the regulations, that they do fundamentally serve different purposes. And that corresponds with the reason why we need to bring some of what is currently in the regulations into our bylaw.
Yeah. Well, as you know very well, the towns surrounding us have a variety of views on that. Wenham and Topsfield put everything about vernal pools in the regulations. Manchester puts everything in the bylaw. And what they say is quite different.
Yeah, and that may very well be because they are not defining, like the towns that have everything in the regulations may not be defining vernal pools differently from the WPA. Maybe I can bring you in here.
So,
There's a lot of consistency in the details. When they give details, some don't have any details at all. I mean, Ipswich basically says nothing about vernal pools anywhere in the bylaw or the regulations. It's just kind of ignored.
Right.
So there's a level of detail, but if you're going to put the detail in, I think it should be in the regulations, and I want to go through and explain what's wrong with what's in here right now.
Just before you do that, two things. One, to clarify, the regulations absolutely can and should contain more information about all of this, and vernal pools specifically. So I just want everyone to be clear that these are not replacing the regulations. You know, the regulations build upon the bylaw. And so what we have in front of us is just the bylaw.
But if you put this in the bylaw, I mean, what you have in the bylaw was just copied over from the regulations. So what's the point of the regulations regarding vernal pools if you put everything in the bylaw?
your existing bylaw
You
does
can't,
not say vernal
once
pools.
you've said it in here,
Exactly.
you can't change it.
Yeah. So the issue and the reason for defining vernal pools as we are defining them here is that our current bylaw doesn't define vernal pools in a way that expands, beyond the definition of vernal pools in the WPA. So the whole idea that the town of Hamilton would like to protect vernal pools outside of wetlands is not possible under our current bylaw. Like, it's not a legally recognizable binding protection. So my understanding is that, George, like, you want to protect vernal pools more, and I think the commission wants to protect vernal pools as it has outlined in the regulations, and the rationale for bringing that definition here into the bylaw is to enable that.
It makes it a lot more defensible.
Yeah.
There's an issue.
I understand the defensible argument. I mean, this is what a lawyer would say, of course. If you look at the state, the Wetlands Protection Act says vernal pools, maybe. But everything about vernal pools is in the regulations. They don't seem to have a problem with not defining things regarding vernal pools extensively in the Wetlands Protection Act, and we shouldn't either. And there are the majority town views around us are to put all the information in the regulations, not in the bylaw.
To be clear, you don't want any mention of vernal pools in our bylaw.
You have to mention it. If you don't have any
Right.
mention of it in the bylaw, you can't refer to it in the regulations, right?
So what, okay.
But that's
so-
the way things usually are done. And the majority opinion is to say vernal pools in the bylaw and then put everything else in the regulations regarding vernal pools.
Okay, so I'm just
And the
keeping an eye on
and the good
time,
reason
but,
for that is they can change it easily
so what would you like, what is your recommendation?
Yeah.
for the vernal pool.
Yeah.
Every time this comes up, you have this thing in there about, you need 750 feet to 1,200 feet in order to preserve the population.
That's all coming.
Vernal pools preserve habitat, right? They're not preserved as wetlands, they're preserved as habitat.
Only the habitat where they breed.
And this is talking about habitat. If you're not protecting a reasonable area around the vernal pool, you're going to lose the population.
Yes.
So, and it doesn't work. That was the reason why it was, the protection was extended to 200 feet initially. And all the early versions of this revised bylaw said 200 feet.
So you're talking about
and only
buffer
at
zones.
the end did you go back to 100 feet.
Buffer.
You're talking about buffer zone, so not about defining the vernal pool, you're talking about defining the buffer zone around a vernal pool.
Yes, right.
Okay. So,
In this town, we're losing a lot of our
You have a link
population.
on the webpage and under the Conservation Commission to what Pennsylvania is doing. Pennsylvania's recommendation is 1,000 feet.
yep. So, okay, so I have a clear
So
sense.
it
So
is-
what your concern is around, not actually this section in the definition of vernal pool, but in defining the buffer zone around a vernal pool, you would like to see it larger than the 100-foot buffer zone. And
That's the way we initially had thought about it. you
right,
know.
okay, and so I think to clarify, and for anyone else, that's absolutely true. There had been discussions amongst the Conservation Commission that ideally, to truly protect vernal pools and the services that they provide, the buffer zone of 100 feet is inadequate. That being said, as discussed with members of the public and after a lot of feedback, that there was concern about the commission at this juncture expanding its jurisdiction, and in wanting to ensure that that was not the objective at this time in the revision of the bylaw,
Fine.
we have aligned the
But if you
definition.
put 100 feet in the bylaw,
Oh, let me just finish. We've aligned the definition of the aura with the current definition in the regulations so that it is 100 feet across all of the listed resource areas, including vernal pools. And I think this is a really important point that you're making, that that is insufficient to protect the function of vernal pools. And this is something that we can include in our parking lot list of items for the next iteration and the next revision of the bylaw, to explore expanding that buffer around vernal pools. I think that's really useful.
I had bought the vernal pool protection up several years ago, and we wondered how much could we protect, or
Yep.
get away with protecting, how much would the town let us? And that's let us see those things. At the time we were talking 300, we said, what's reasonable that the town will accept? And I thought we talked about 200, but our regulations only mention 100.
Our regulations only mention 100, and I know this is disappointing for a lot of people. I would love to protect
Yes.
these resource areas more, but we are bringing this bylaw proposal to the annual town meeting where people have a lot of different opinions, and I think the important thing that we are trying to achieve right now is to ensure that we have a legally defensible, robust bylaw. Because if we do not pass this bylaw, then all of the protections that are articulated in the regulations could go away. Like, there are no links to the bylaw. So I just think it's really important for us to have a properly structured defensible bylaw first, and then discuss robustly expanding that.
Okay. Well, isn't that the purpose for us, is to make sure everything that we've been protecting in our regulations is mentioned at least by their name
Yes.
in the bylaw?
Yes.
So you have the connection, you can support it.
Yes.
We're not supposed to add anything to
Correct.
it. And I think another thing, again, is for the general public, not necessarily myself, they're looking at a proposal or an update, however you want to call it, that's 16 pages long, and the old one is, 4 pages long. And yet we're saying, well, we're not changing anything. That I think people are having a hard time swallowing.
Yes.
And if you're going to do that, we need to make sure that the people understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt for just a
Yeah,
second?
please.
Tom Myers just joined the meeting via Zoom, so I need to call my meeting to order. If that's
Sure.
all right, just a point of order. At this point, 7:27, I'll call the Board of Selectmen to order, and I've got Jamie Knudsen and Tom Myers online. Tom and Jamie, if you could just say you're present for roll call.
Oh, let me let Tom
Yeah, you
talk.
let him in
Yep.
for just a second. Then you can kick him back.
And you should both be able to talk now.
Tom Myers, present. Sorry I'm late. Just got out of work.
Thanks, Tom.
Jamie Knudsen, present.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, I appreciate it. All right, back to
Super.
the general conversation, I
All right.
apologize.
Super.
Well, I guess there's no point in detailing what's wrong with what you say about vernal pools in here.
Well, George, I would suggest
I
maybe
know
that
you want to
you...
move on to other things, so I can put it in an email,
Yeah, I was just going
Yeah.
to say, send an email to Laura.
Please do.
what's wrong, and there are
Yeah.
a number of things that
Yeah.
are really wrong in it.
And absolutely,
You
yeah,
can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
Put it in the bylaw, or ignore it, which is most likely.
We need your
please do send that to us because we take very seriously all of the feedback that we receive. I hope that comes through in our discussion tonight. And again, I know this is disappointing that we can't make all of the changes that are proposed tonight in this version of the bylaw. I mean, again, town meeting is April 1st, so the commission is going to have to very quickly at our meeting next week agree to kind of the very final tweaks and decisions that we've made here. And to underscore, this has been a year's worth of discussions and conversations so far and will be years into the future. This is a living document. So, yeah.
I was going to say, these things can also be.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
While Darcy's coming to the podium, I just want to say to George, Lauren has been great during this process and basically begging everybody for input, so your input is valued. Please don't discount yourself. Send it to Lauren and she'll incorporate what we can.
I also just want to remind everybody and people who are listening at home that a lot of this discussion will be taking place on the floor of town meeting as well. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for everyone to put their voice out there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darcy.
3 minutes each.
And 3 minutes each, right?
In 3 minutes each, as Virginia notes.
And Lauren, just to follow up on what everyone else is saying, the reason we're here tonight in this room, as opposed to our usual Zoom meetings, which for some reason don't get put onto the cable, is so that people see it and we prompt discussion and we prompt feedback and we hopefully will receive lots of emails at BCOLLERAN@hamiltonma.gov. So that we can get what we can get and make sure that as many people as are able can find a way to get heard prior to the final version that goes to the floor.
Right, and if you can't remember what Brian said for his email, you can go to the town website, the Conservation Commission, and it's right there with the link.
Okay, so I know we are, we have a lot of ground to cover still, so we will continue moving forward. So the next section, section 3, is jurisdiction, and the note here that I've included is that this section does not exist in the current bylaw. There are, sections, pieces of language that exist, but as a section itself, jurisdiction is not organized as such, and it is a very important section to have. So then in terms of comments that have come in, there's a question here around how are these in other areas like smaller ponds defined? So the aura, we've just had that discussion. So, the definition of pond, vernal pools, freshwater wetlands, aura are all articulated above in section 2. Any other comments there? We'll move to section 4.
The only time riverfront, which has a 200-foot buffer or protecting zone, the only place it's mentioned is when they're discussing the definition of aura.
Yes.
To note that the riverfront area does not have an aura, it doesn't have a buffer zone that is referred to as the resource area called, or,
That's a useful
but
point
that's
to
all I
make.
could find
Yeah.
in the whole regulations.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because we are not proposing any changes to the way riverfront areas are treated under the bylaw than how they are treated
but-
under the Wetlands Protection Act.
But you do have it listed, don't you? For one of these sections, is for riverfront? Or within a section?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly referenced, but specifically for that reason, to clarify that the riverfront area does not have a aura around it.
I just have a problem if you have a definition for riverfront here under E. Okay,
Well, I think that actually speaks again to Amy's point that the reason for having definitions is to define how terms are used specifically in the context of this bylaw. And so the use of the term riverfront area here doesn't deviate from the Wetlands Protection Act. So the assumption is that the definition's the same.
Yeah, it's very clear in jurisdiction. You stop with aura, and then it says lands adjoining perennial rivers, streams, brooks, and creeks out to a distance of 200 feet, as outlined in the WPA. So, yeah, it's
But
clear.
that's not what, that's not what is, they have another section here. It would be underneath section 7.
All right, so
letter.
when we get to section 7, we can talk about that.
Just to jump in here, so that hopefully all of the home viewers, to just state this for them, this is the section that intermittent streams were dropped out of. That was something that I had more to do with than others for putting into that original version, because from my perspective, running the paperwork and running the reviews, intermittent streams are a paperwork nightmare, and it would simplify the application process if all streams were regulated in the same manner. Amy, as an example, with the drought that just concluded, there was about a year when intermittent streams, should an applicant have wished their waterway to be regulated as intermittent, would have had a whole wealth of time, money, energy just sucked right down the drain trying to establish that their stream was intermittent or not.
Because there was no stream.
Yeah, there was a drought, and so they aren't allowed.
You deleted all that, right?
Yeah, you're not allowed.
The only thing in the bylaw, I think, the present, not bylaw, present regulations, it simply says in stream, intermittent perennial, that's all it's, that word is just mentioned at one time to be, what a stream is, it's one.
Yeah.
Right, but that, to me, what was simplifying the paperwork and reducing regulatory burden is also a jurisdictional expansion, and so we removed the jurisdictional expansion from this version, even though I still think it would be reducing the regulatory burden to have it in there, but we removed the regulatory expansion. So that's just one example of hearing the feedback,
Yeah.
and from the professional, even though I don't like it, right, we did it anyway, and
We have dealt with intermittent before, but we do it as it comes up, if it comes up. And then it's a matter of prove it's there or not prove it there, and it's generally done with your calculations and stuff. You're making a lot more work for yourself, and you're already piled high with all the other stuff.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you, Brian, for...
It may go with the next version of
Yeah,
something.
right, exactly. Worth discussing in the future. Thank you, Brian, for referencing that. I know Gordon Glass, I see you on the call, and I believe that was a concern that was raised by Johnson and Bornstein in October. So just want to be very clear with you so that you understand that has been heard and addressed, and the concern around intermittent streams is no longer an issue in this version of the bylaw.
And mapping out intermittent streams is not part of the job description for Conservation Commission.
So now we're moving into section 4, exemptions and exceptions. Just to be clear, this section does not exist in the current bylaw. There were no comments that we've received. It's very straightforward, and again, comes directly from the MAC model bylaw. Moving on to section 5, applications and fees. This section does not exist in the current bylaw. There was a brief mention of fees in the current bylaw, one sentence, but we've pulled the boilerplate and the recommendations from the MAC model here to better articulate this.
Are you talking about 5?
Section 5, correct. So then there's a comment here.
There are 2 sections in our current bylaws
There's
that
one-
does.
yeah,
that
there's a
separate
short
them,
sentence.
separate it. Well, actually, there's quite a bit about fees.
Yeah, that's what I've copied in here. Fees to
And
defray costs.
applications,
Yeah,
it's pretty short.
yeah.
But yeah, like one comment about application, which I read, it jumped out at me. that the MACC is wrong because they were referring to both filings for an RDA as well as for notice of intent as being public hearings. They're not. Filing for an RDA is a meeting, and only NOIs get called a hearing. Now, maybe you don't think it's important, but I've gone by that for so long that when someone starts talking about a meeting, I automatically snap into the, oh, an RFD. And I found, no, they're talking about it. So I do think that needs to be corrected. It's a nomenclature thing, but I think it's important.
Do you see the line actually where that is?
I can find it on my notes, pretty sure. Should be at the beginning. No, page 7B, public hearings.
All right, so we're not quite at page 7.
That's
so
right,
I will.
okay.
Okay, so
All right,
page 7.
Well,
Yeah,
it came
so we
up,
will get there in a second. Thank you. That's useful. So then just in section 5, applications and fees, there was a comment that was received here around this paragraph. So I'll just read it. Any person desiring to know whether a proposed activity or an area is subject to this bylaw may in writing request a determination from the commission. Such a request for determination of applicability, RDA, or abbreviated notice of resource area delineation, ANRAD, filed under the act shall include information and plans as are deemed necessary by the commission. The comment here is, I believe, regarding that last clause, as deemed necessary by the commission. It says pretty broad authority as to what is necessary or not. Is this made by a Concom admin or full board of Concom? Is this necessary determination made in advance or once the application has been filed? So I actually think those questions speak more to what is articulated in the regulations. I think this is standard language to include that the commission determines what is necessary.
You have that discretion in any event, even under the act, you have that discretion.
Okay.
I do think when you read this paragraph, if you're not familiar with things, you might think that this is different than people applying, but it's actually an application. You apply, we have a form, and currently we use the WPA form, and you have to write, and it's described as to what you need to do, just as you have an NOI form for an NOI.
Right.
So here it just almost sounds like, oh, we'll just write them a letter and see if it's appropriate. Well, generally you can find that out before you bother actually writing a form and all that work.
Yep, and that's a good example of how that degree of detail, the what of applying this, is laid out in the details of the regulations. So then section 6, notice and hearings. This section does exist in the current bylaw, but to be clear, the reference to notice doesn't include anything about providing notice to abutters. And as Virginia just mentioned, in our current bylaw, hearings only refer to NOIs, not other types of permits. So I might actually just ask.
It does refer to sending out notifications, but I think it's underneath the part about if it has nothing to do with the regular filing of for an RDA or an order of conditions. I think it's under something like filling a wetland, mitigation, or it might be underneath our request for habitat study or something.
Right.
Somewhere around there is. So it's there, but it's not underneath what you'd expect it to be. Okay.
So this language comes from the MAC model. The first, as any person filing a permit or other application or RDA or ANRAD or other request with the commission shall at the same time give written notice thereof by certified mail to all abutters according to the most recent tax records. Amy, could I just ask you to comment on whether that deviates from how you've seen this approached in?
This does come from the MACC model, and it's my understanding that the reasoning behind that was to make RDAs in line with NOIs. So everybody you have to notify somebody, your abutters, if you want to apply for an NOI or you want to apply for an RDA. Many towns have this. My Conservation Commission, we required a butter notice for RDAs. The one thing that I think is the biggest deviation that the MACC has done is they've made they've made the abutters 300 feet, where the act only requires 100 feet.
Right.
So, and then there's another difference. The act also requires, if it's a linear project, it's 1,000 feet. But then again, that would be more stringent, so that's fine. Leave it in the act. You don't need it. And the reason being, I think, for 300 feet is because 300 feet is for zoning and.
It's a standard kind
Yep,
of.
It's a
it's
standard,
very
yep.
standard. So I don't see a problem with it. I'm just
Yep.
pointing it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think, as you mentioned, the 100 feet is just not enough.
Yeah.
And then 1,000 feet is a little bit egregious in different cases, so this is,
Yeah. We've been using it for years because it lines up, like you say.
Okay. Got it. All right. Let's see. This was just a note here in terms of structure. We did in the current regulations, we moved the following section out of the current bylaw as we believe it's better suited for the regs. So there is a section in the current bylaw in coordination with other boards that, could go in this section 6, but we believe it is better suited for the regulations. And it's just about like how notice is sent to the Concom, and how, let's see, like how plans should conform to the applicable regulation. I mean, it's stuff that
And
should
the
be in the
regulations
regs.
have that in there,
Yeah,
too.
yeah. All right, so the next section, section 7, permits and conditions. This section does exist in the current bylaw, but it is limited. And so, again, here, sections in blue come from the MAC model, sections in purple come from the regs, and then, let's see, yeah, that's the overview there. Sorry, Virginia, I'm just gonna,
No, go ahead.
let's see, so I'm gonna so there's a note here, and I may invite, since I see you on the call, Mr. Glass, to just comment on your concern here about the wildlife habitat study issue, because I believe that we responded to this as a commission via email, but I'd like to hear your kind of continued concerns.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Hi, thanks for recognizing me, Gordon Glass with Johnson & Bornstein. If you wouldn't mind first, I think we passed one of our issues in section 7A.
Yep.
Before 7B. So that's that highlighted area there.
Oh, yes, yep.
Which plan?
You know, we would generally raise a concern with the language that the commission is not only empowered to consider, but required to consider, with that shall language. Any loss, degradation, isolation, et cetera, elsewhere in the community and the watershed from past activities, whether permitted, unpermitted, or exempt, and foreseeable future activities. That language, I think anyone watching tonight is going to agree that responsible stewardship of natural resources is important, as is the duty that the Conservation Commission is charged with. But also when it comes to government, especially unelected government, handing over what could potentially be arbitrary power is a dangerous concept. So here, this is such a broad standard for what the commission is allowed to consider when determining whether to permit or deny a project, that the impact on landowners in the town could be arbitrary, unequal, unjust, inequitable. There could be a lot of considerations that come to the commission's mind that don't have to be justified. And we kind of just assert that this provision here, it needs revision earlier you said that kind of the key goal here is a robust bylaw and a legally defensible bylaw. And I think that this provision here could really fall under legally indefensible under certain circumstances, because it opens the town up to claims that the commission's making decisions based on factors completely outside of the control or input of the property owners. And I think it's always a good guiding light that a bylaw should have objective criteria and standards explicitly delineated and outlined in the bylaw, so that the commission can render decisions and point to the criteria it's basing its decisions on, rather than what we broadly considered development in the past and our consideration of some speculative future development that we don't even know is going to occur, to decide to deny a project on a property that may not even be in close proximity to some of that development we're considering, you know, or period. I mean, this actually allows the commission to deny a project with considerations of future activities that aren't actually substantiated to occur and may never occur. So we would suggest that this provision get a hard look, because we really think that this needs a revision to prevent the commission from being able to render arbitrary decisions without any objective criteria to base their decisions on.
Thank you for that. That's a really helpful comment. So, Town Council, I would love your thoughts on that in the context of how you've seen this, because again, this language specifically does come from the MAC model.
Sure. So first of all, it says foreseeable future activities. So there's not a lot of arbitrarity. I'm not sure there's a large concern there. It has to be foreseeable. The other thing is that there is a lot of discretion on the commission under the Act. There's a lot of discretion on the commission. You determine whether something is, you know, whether something will adversely impact a wetland resource area. That is your job. That's your job under the Wetland Protection Act. In fact, I actually think that this is helpful because it kind of lays out exactly, you know, what you guys need to consider: loss, degradation, isolation, replacement, replication. I definitely think this is legally defensible.
If I could be allowed to respond quickly.
Yeah.
Unless Town Council has more to add, I don't want to, it sound like she might be still going.
Nope. Yeah, please do respond.
Okay, sorry, Amy. So I understand what Town Council is saying, but there are two things I'd want to respond to there. First off, foreseeable future activity is it is still very broad language. You know, I mean, what is foreseeable is going to come to a variable amount of interpretations. And second off, I think this is a broader comment. Reliance on language being found in the MACC model as being inherently defensible. I think there are some problems there. I mean, model laws, model guidelines, there are hundreds, if not thousands of those in the country. You know, a great example is the Model Penal Code, where I think maybe 2 out of the 50 states have adopted that in its entirety. Most jurisdictions determine that, yeah, we'll take pieces, but some of this is not, you know, very well written, and some of this could result in some actual practical consequences. So while the MACC can be a guide for pulling language, that doesn't mean that all of the language within the MACC might be the most finely tuned language. And the last thing I'd say is, you know, the commission's mission to control adverse impacts to wetland resource areas, to regulate those impacts, is certainly more narrow than generally considering past development in the community and future potential development as essentially, from the way this language looks, defined by the commission and the community. So I think the commission should be cautious to adopt language, and the town should be cautious to endorse language that gives the commission the power to consider such a broad range of development as part of its decision-making on individual projects. And I do think that could open up, again, to the comment of it being a legally defensible bylaw, I do think that could certainly open the town up to challenges. And, you know, maybe more importantly, that, you know, there are a lot of landowners in the town who, you know, these individual property owners, they don't necessarily have perfect guidance here. And that's something you really want to look for, is that the property owners in the town can look at the bylaw and understand that when they apply to receive a permit for a project, these are the criteria they have to meet. This is what's going to be applied to the project. And when it becomes this kind of vague standard that in the 11th hour could theoretically be applied by the commission to say, well, you've satisfied all the other criteria, but we're looking around at the community, we're thinking about the future, and we just think the project isn't going to work. That puts a level of uncertainty on individual applicants that I think is certainly dangerous, cumbersome for property owners in the town, and invites legal challenges.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
May I ask a follow-up to
Yeah,
Mr.
please.
Glass? Mr. Glass, I just have a question. Would you, would you, are you advocating for striking this language or changing it in some way?
You know, I would have to see what a revision looks like. I mean, if a revision isn't possible, I would certainly say strike the language. Off the top of my head, I really can't see a way. This language is so broad to revise it and keep the spirit of this language without still running into the same problem. So I think in the primary idea here would be to strike this specific language, but we'd love to see an idea for a revision.
Gotcha.
Okay, yep, Virginia.
Thank you. I had 2 comments on page 8 for, and one was for A, one for B. The A.
Sorry, Virginia,
I'm
just
sorry.
before we get to that, I just want to make sure that we've wrapped up this comment. Amy, I want to give,
Is that?
this is, okay. All right, yep, all right.
Page 8A, project evaluation. Yeah, I believe that is it. Okay. When I read through it, I thought that the first sentence is definitely, it's general, but it's what we do, okay, and it makes sense. But then the rest of this paragraph is not referenced in our regulations or our bylaw. So I would like to sort of see it deleted only for this, this current rendition, because this is something we want to discuss and either reword or put in or not for a second time. The other part of page 8B, resource area alteration.
Actually, just before we get to B, I want to, so noted on that, yeah, Brian, you had a comment?
Yeah, so just so Amy, just a little conversation, a little ping pong if you don't mind. When I read this, I see the job description of the conservation agent under the WPA, and more or less, right? Yeah. And so from my desk, from the regulatory overburdening of an applicant, I would not want to have 2 slightly different sets of powers, some of which apply under the WPA and some of which apply under the bylaw. My office should have the same powers under both laws, and then you simply extend the power from the WPA related regulated resource areas to the bylaw regulated resource areas. And if I mean, to me, that is a greater legal rabbit hole to have a bylaw regulated space that's regulated under bylaw only powers that are differing from the WPA and those WPA powers. And I definitely would trip over that at some point legally and just make a wreck of Amy's job, is my own expectation.
And you're talking specifically about, in this last sentence, the description of like making decisions that are contextualized both within space and time?
Both within both laws, because
Right.
if somebody...
That is something that is definitively a requirement under the WPA, and therefore
and under
should
the
be
bylaw.
re-articulated.
Yes, they should be re-articulated, and the powers of, and this is true of most other sections here that we've had feedback from, that's too much power given to the Concom. The thing is that I have those powers already, and this is consistently expanding them to new resource areas and bylaw-specific spaces so that I actually don't lose myself in which weed. I'll skip the metaphors. Anyway, I just need to be able to do my job and keep my head on straight. And so I don't want 2 slightly parallel and different sets of powers that I'm trying to deploy.
We don't, no, okay.
Could I just ask Amy if there's anything else you want to add on that?
No, the only other thing is just to simply point out that under the Wetland Protection Act itself, under 13140, I think it's paragraph 17 or 19, the Conservation Commission, when a property is sold to a new owner, the Conservation Commission has 3 years to still seek enforcement. So there is looking at past activities. That's in the Act itself, so.
Yep. Okay. Virginia? Yeah, thank you. I mean, just any
Okay,
other
no,
comments from
that's
the
good.
public on that?
Okay.
Hearing none, yeah, Virginia,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, we're still on A, project evaluation?
Yes, now,
okay.
yep.
Okay. The portion of the paragraph that is the first
Oh,
paragraph.
wait. I see a comment from Tom. Sorry, Tom.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I just had a question on that language, and I'm wondering if like either town council or someone from the Concom could give maybe an example of when that might happen. So is that essentially you're looking at a project, and then, you know, as part of that project, you might be looking at a similar project that may have happened, you know, years ago that may have caused some sort of, you know, effect on the resource area, and so you're using that as you know, evidence to support or deny this particular project? I'm just trying to get an example of what this language might look like in practice. If that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. It's a good question. Who wants to take the first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go for it. So when the project comes across my desk, I'm going to look at it in context and in isolation. And so project bound, you know, I don't review according to the neighbors, like what the neighbors have. I'm reviewing in accordance with the project on the table. But for, say, Chabaco Lake, that many of those properties have been developed right down to the water line, I know that if somebody were to clear the last patch of vegetation on the shoreline of Chabaco Lake, that the value of that resource is higher because of its rarity. And so in context and recognizing how that neighborhood has developed, you know, I would probably say, you really shouldn't cut this down. We need to protect more of this than the last time this project was in front of us, because we know better now what the value of this resource area is and what the value of this vegetation would be. And I would make a much bigger stink about not doing something that had been allowed in the past, would be an easy example.
This is where I have a problem right now with dealing with
that makes sense.
myself.
Ryan, I think that's a really good example, and I think that sort of it's kind of what I was, you know, thinking I would hear as an example, and I think it makes sense and actually puts into context of why this language probably is necessary, because you're going to want to have that, at least have that power to be able to consider that in that particular context.
Yeah.
So that was helpful. Thanks.
Thanks for the question,
Now I
Tom.
have 3 comments instead of 2.
That's okay.
Okay, well, okay.
And actually, sorry, Virginia, before you go, I know we're at 8 o'clock, but that's our goal time to finish. We hopefully can be quick, but we're not obligated to be done at this
You can
time,
just
right?
refer back to everything I said for all the power expansions. That will get us right through the next couple of sections.
You see, to me, our coordinator is supposed to work with us. And if you have a problem of how to do something, you're supposed to come to us and say, what's this problem? What am I going to do? Well, when it comes to filings, you review the filing that is full. And that's all you do right then, as far as, you know, the paperwork and getting everything done according to the time frame that is required by the law. It's not really up to you to talk to the applicant about what you think they should do, unless, of course, you know it's what the commission wants too, in which case you're just speaking for the commission, okay?
So your argument is such that
Yeah.
this language is necessary to ensure that the commission also thinks through that whole
Well,
process? Okay.
Yeah. Anyways,
So you wanted to move to
finally,
section B.
I hope we all remember. Okay. Again, we're back at page 8, A, project evaluation.
Yep.
I was saying that only the first sentence, and actually I was incorrect. I think after looking at more like about 2 sentences at least, is already done by the commission. But the entire paragraph is new. It is not in the current regs or the bylaws. Therefore, if we're really following along with, we're just correcting the connection between regulations and bylaw and not adding anything to it until the next phase, then that needs to come out.
Well, okay.
That's, you might, but then the other one is underneath page 8, resource area alteration and replication.
Yep.
Line 2, I said, whenever deemed appropriate, is where the terminology there. Regardless of the type of resource area on the amount
Yep.
or type of alteration proposed, continues to the last sentence. Okay. I actually said the last sentence was fine. It sort of collects everything together. But the first sentence up to the quote here is okay, but everything else written is new.
Again,
It's
this-
new for what we have, and you're not supposed to put anything new in there.
Well, I just want to clarify there. So as we've discussed, and everything in blue comes from the MAC model, and
I wish you'd stop thinking the MAC model is perfect.
we
It's
do
great to
not
base
think
it
of
on.
it as perfect. And this is also just to clarify what Mr. Glass had raised. Like yes, a lot of our proposed new language does come from the MAC model. Not all of it. I want to be very clear. It was not a wholesale copy paste. We've looked through it at length, and we've seen where pieces of our current bylaw and regulations fit into that. I think recognizing that the structure and the integrity of that structure is very useful for framing our bylaw, we have new pieces of the language that come in that provide that scaffolding into which the content from our regulations and current bylaw fit. Were we not to include any language from the MAC model that is external to our bylaw and regs, like we would have a very it would not flow. There would be no flow. So,
You have to rewrite part of ours to fit
the
into that.
important part is to be clear that none of this language in blue is changing the thrust of like the
I don't
commission's
agree with
powers
that.
or
Okay.
structure. And that's what, Amy, I just want to, again, you've reviewed it, you've clarified. As you have seen, the inclusion of this new language here and in other places from the MAC model, it's not changing what the commission can do. It's simply providing a structure within which that can.
Whenever it deems appropriate, that is.
So so that's very specific, though. I think you have, it sounds
It's
like a
actually
broader.
very non-specific. It allows you to do anything. It doesn't limit us.
Yes.
But it
That
might be
sentiment,
referred to
though,
in the
okay.
WPA.
So I feel like we're talking about two different things. One is
Okay.
just the general inclusion of language from the MAC model, which, yes, we're not saying that we're including no new words. We are, but that the meaning is not changing. This, though, what you're picking up on, and I see, Gordon, you have your hand raised, and I know this was another item that you had actually flagged back in October around, your argument was that this, whenever deems appropriate, is an expansion of the commission's capacity to potentially ask for expensive wildlife habitat studies. And our interpretation of that and read on it is that, the commission in its current power has the capacity to require applicants to provide evidence that their projects are not going to negatively impact habitat being a protected resource area value. And so, though the language in the current bylaw and regs don't specifically say wildlife habitat studies, that is implicit in the commission's powers, and it is also explicit in the commission's powers under the Wetlands Protection Act. And before I open it up for a comment from Gordon, I see your hand is down, but I would like you to respond. Amy, Brian, I'd like you to jump
I
in.
would just say that wherever it deems appropriate is also bounded by section 1 and 3, the jurisdiction and the purpose.
Yep.
And so within that jurisdiction and for
Be
the
more
purpose-
elaborate, because I'm not going to remember from this and this. I'm not going to remember the.
Right, so that wildlife habitat study has to be jurisdictional.
Of course.
Right, and it has to be for the purposes of the bylaw. We can't ask for
Yes.
wildlife habitat study because we're generally concerned about the population of monarch butterflies
I know.
in the eastern continental United States.
I have no doubt. That's not a problem.
So it's not whenever, ever. It's whenever within the confines of this.
Well, I think it could be reworded and do what you want to do, and actually do what
You have a
is
proposal
already
for that? 'Cause,
mentioned.
like, what we are seeking right now is
Yeah.
specific proposals.
To Virginia's point, and she's saying, and Brian, you're saying it's referencing a previous thing in the bylaw. When we've done bylaw revisions in the past, there's been times when we'll mark a section. So like here, which is wherever deems appropriate,
Refer back.
as seen in section 1 something. So you're able to reference a document a little bit easier.
Yep.
And so I would say anytime you have that opportunity in this document, I would do that.
Yeah, so like an
You can
add-in
refer
right
back to
there.
different sections,
Yeah.
if there's something else, refer to definitions in section.
Right.
X.
So foreseeable, our powers are huge as limited by section 1 and 3,
Right.
Yep,
or something like that.
Right, something like that.
yep.
Just so it's clear that helps Virginia and whoever else is reading it say, well, what do you
I
mean
know.
wherever deems
Yeah.
appropriate?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Yes,
refer
sir.
to this section, okay.
I think that's a good suggestion.
You understand what I'm not disagreeing with
works.
what we do. I'm saying that you want it to be clear for everybody to be able to understand. To me, it's easily misunderstood.
I think I went to sleep, sorry.
Okay,
Come back up.
I do have, did I have any? I think I had something else.
Just Amy, on that, the wildlife habitat study, I think that's a great suggestion to bound it. Okay. Gordon, did you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you referencing me again. I know that we're a little bit behind schedule, or maybe more than a little bit, so I'll try to keep
How
this
it goes.
brief. First off, and there were some comments I still had on section 7A, but basically what I'm going to say here about 7B mirrors those comments. Referencing general provisions in the bylaw. These are the general purposes of the bylaw, the general powers of the Conservation Commission. I don't think it's advisable to use that as a crutch to say some of this language isn't perfect, but it can be curtailed by other language within the bylaw, right? So when we're talking about the commission in 7A, when we're talking about the commission can consider all this past and future development when determining whether to approve or deny a project. I don't know that we'd have any objection if similar language was simply in the purpose section. The purpose is to consider the degradation of environmental resources within the community. That's part of the goal of the bylaw, is to look at the overall impact in the community of development. Not that when it comes down to whether to approve or deny a project, we're just going to give this kind of sweeping authority in this language to the commission. So I think bouncing around from section to section it can be a recipe for disaster. And I think that same comment goes to section 7B. I think it shouldn't be a reason to ignore potentially problematic language that, well, hopefully other sections of the bylaw, we can foresee other sections of the bylaw maybe mounting a defense to challenges that this language isn't good. I think the first step should be to recognize that the language is potentially problematic and to consider revisions to the language. So currently, the standard, it was said that basically the commission has broad control to order wildlife habitat studies whenever, but that's really not the standard under the state act or the regulations. Under the state act and regulations, certain thresholds have to be crossed before the commission can order a wildlife habitat study. And those thresholds are really only crossed by larger projects. So now when we put in whenever it deems appropriate, theoretically, the commission could require a wildlife habitat study for someone trying to fence off their backyard. They could require a wildlife habitat study for one of the newer homeowners in town trying to, make use of the newer provisions and add an accessory dwelling unit to their home for their aging parents. These wildlife habitat studies, as outlined in the couple letters our office has sent to the select board and the commission, they can cost tens of thousands of dollars. They can delay projects for as much as a year. And basically this language is putting it on, and certainly can put it on, the average everyday homeowner to be, again, just like what we were talking about with section 7A, to have this degree of uncertainty when they apply to for any project on their land, this degree of uncertainty about what's going to be required from them and how the decision's going to be made as they try to complete their project. Whereas in 7A, it's a degree of uncertainty about how the decision is going to be made. Here, it's what's going to be required of the homeowner. Should they expect, after they've gone through the expenses, the architectural fees, if we're not just talking about fence, but again, this could theoretically, happen with a fence, but say an accessory dwelling unit, the architectural fees, the legal fees, they've already accrued a bunch of costs, and then they come into the commission and they get blindsided by a wildlife habitat study that, all due respect to the current commission, but this is not just the current commission, this is future commissions, this is a level of power that you don't necessarily want to give to unelected government officials, because people make mistakes, and the objective criteria that everyone in the town has agreed on with town meeting, that the voters have agreed on, that guide the commission's decision making, that is a much more robust system of governance than just leaving it in the hands of the current commissioners to determine when they think it's appropriate to require certain things. So just as with the provision 7A we discussed, we do believe that this provision could potentially be a massive burden on the average everyday residents and property owners in the town, and we think the language certainly needs to be considered for revision.
Okay. Yep, Brian, I see you have a comment.
So I actually
Got the list.
I see it actually as the exact opposite, because the burden of proof is on the applicant. And so the burden of proof being on the applicant means that if the commission, to stick with the fence example, and there's a vernal pool nearby, right? And so the value, generally speaking, of the vernal pool is going to have to do with habitat and wildlife. And so if the burden of proof is on the applicant and the applicant cannot convince the commission that their project will not be detrimental to that resource area, then the wildlife habitat study would be the way to prove that, they can meet that burden of proof. So, I think of something like that as actually a way for an applicant to sort of, demonstrate their commitment to not harming the resource area and the wildlife habitat, and that it offers them an opportunity to meet the burden of proof that they are required to meet. So to me, something like that is just, as much as it may look like a burden and an expensive thing, it's also an out to let something happen that might otherwise not be allowable, because you could just say, yeah, this looks like it's not going to work, and you'd be in your within your rights because the applicant didn't meet the burden of proof. So,
if I could have a moment to respond to that.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Referencing the burden of proof, I understand the argument that's being trying to be advanced here, but the burden of proof is something that exists in this bylaw, it's something that exists in the state regulations, but the state regulations, which I would consider a more robust guiding light than the MACC, those state regulations only allow for wildlife habitat studies under certain circumstances. So again, I think the commission or the town, the select board and the commission should all be wary about the concept of kind of granting this unfettered discretion whenever it deems appropriate as such broad language that is just a mile beyond the powers that are granted under the state laws. And obviously we all understand here that the local law can be more stringent than the state law. But if we're going to purport, as was claimed earlier, that this really isn't an expansion of the commission's jurisdiction, when language like this is included in the proposed bylaw, I think we have to set the record straight that this really is an expansion of the commission's jurisdiction. They would not have this authority otherwise. There would have to be certain thresholds that were crossed before the commission could actually require this type of study. Thank you.
Thanks.
One comment.
Okay, yeah, Virginia.
Just referring to the resource areas, okay? In our regulations at the moment, referring to this section, they actually list bank land subject to flooding, boarding land subject to flooding, land under water, habitat of rare species, and vernal pool. So the current regs do list that, and I would think you could, since this is supposed to be the first phase, that we could add that in because it exists in the regs and put it in here, and instead of using a lot of the verbiage that's here, we can replace it with this, because instead of saying, estimating the importance of the habitat, considering, but et cetera, instead we could say that. The habitat, including, that way it also doesn't limit it to it, but then we'll give some specific resource areas for that. And it need to be updated to be more inclusive, or to maybe explain the terminology here that seems to be upsetting people. Might be able to reword it without changing its meaning, but for the next, duration, next iteration.
Yeah, okay.
That's all.
Yep. Thank you, Virginia. Yeah. Tom, I see you have a comment.
Yeah, so I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, either Concom or Town Council, but I believe there's simplified and detailed habitat studies. Is that correct? And it sounds like simplified are more for smaller projects, whereas the detailed might be for a larger or greater project. And I'm assuming there's probably some cost differences between the simplified and detailed. But is that accurate, that there are different types of wildlife studies for the size of the project?
That is, yeah, Town Council has confirmed.
That's my experience, yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, Amy, did you want to add anything to this discussion briefly?
No, just that your current bylaw does protect wildlife.
Yep.
So would you say, in your opinion, this phrasing does not expand the power of the commission beyond its current?
Not necessarily, because, correct, because since one of your resource area values is wildlife, you do have the ability to issue regulations that would protect them. So here again, I'm just going to go back to the beginning of what I said. Here again, it just makes it stronger, and I think it gives it more clarity.
We only protect wildlife habitat, not the wildlife itself.
Correct.
It's like the vernal pool, but not the guys that are in it.
That's not what your bylaw says, but
Really?
your bylaw says wildlife,
In the current one?
the current one.
Yep. Okay. The part that all runs together. Okay.
Tom, was this a new hand?
Because that
All right,
overlaps with
everyone
another act somebody else take care of.
Okay, no worries. All right, and yeah, Gordon, I see just a really brief response there.
Yeah, you got it. I know this isn't the forum to go back and forth too much. I just want to say that respectfully on the record, we do disagree with town council's position. The current protections under the bylaw, a general statement that wildlife is a consideration under the bylaw is not enough to establish the bylaw as more stringent than the state requirements. And the state requirements do not permit this kind of sweeping authority to require wildlife habitat studies. So I think this is a very clear expansion of the commission's authority vis-a-vis the current system. Thank you.
Which is why you're enacting a bylaw under the home rule
Right,
amendment.
yeah, right. That's the.
We just
yeah.
want to clarify the point that if the point's being made that the commission's authority is not expanding, this bylaw is in fact expanding the commission's authority. And where that's happening, it's worth pointing out if it's happening in an area where we think it's dangerously expanding their authority into arbitrary territory. That's all. Thank you.
Understood.
So we'd be taking wildlife out for the next rendition. Yes?
We make no decisions tonight. We just capture.
That's right, we're not going to make
Oh,
the decision, but I mean, that's what.
Future conversations, what you're
Yes.
saying, Virginia, I think, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I can affirm, yes, we can discuss that next time.
Yes.
So, okay, moving on quickly. Aura. This is, let's see if there's any comments here. Again, a comment to add damage to aquifer, but as discussed, that's not within the commission's jurisdiction. Moving to section D, the no disturbance and no build zones. So this subsection of permits and conditions doesn't exist in the current bylaw. It's only referenced in the regulations. And so to the point that town council made earlier, we see it as very important in providing more clarity to bring the terminology around no disturb and no build zones here into the bylaw. So then a comment here around the no disturb, no build zones. How burdensome is this requirement, having it in the bylaw versus in the rules and regs where the commission and applications have more flexibility? So town council, or Brian, you have a response here?
Yeah, this one, I have a strong opinion about being in the bylaw because if it's under the regs, as council noted earlier, it could just evaporate at the next meeting, or it could be the whole buffer / aura would be a no build, no disturb. The whims of the members would be, yeah, this is the kind of thing that should be a bylaw vote.
Yeah.
Right, it could increase or decrease depending on the whim of the board.
Yeah,
So-
and to be honest, I mean, the way that we've been approaching this as a commission, it's been consistent. Like, people know what the no disturb, no build zones are. There's not, in my experience, been pushback against that, so I don't think this dramatically changes. I mean, it doesn't change anything about the way that the commission is acting, and it needs to be in the bylaw.
I agree it should be in bylaw, but also primarily because it's not there, we can't get it enforced. Somebody take us.
Right, there's no
This is what
enforcement.
this is right now.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So next comment, there's a comment here around what the actual size of the no disturb zone should be. There is a suggestion here to expand this from 100 feet to 100 to 1,200 feet. This comment has merit. I mean, I think we all understand that 100-foot buffer zone is a conveniently round number. There are deviations between the kind of scopes outlined in the regulations versus what current science demonstrates as necessary to protect resource areas. That being said,
So you're talking about vernal pools, the 1,200-foot thing, not resource areas.
thank you, yes.
Yeah?
But no, this comment is about expanding the no disturb zone.
1,200 feet.
It's page 9.
Yes, it's a question, it's a comment that was received from a member of the public. I am not putting this up as a proposal, I just want this to be clear.
That 1,200-foot thing, though, only relates scientifically to vernal pools, as far as I know. I have not heard that number thrown around for any other reason.
Yes.
So just because you caught my ear.
Thank you, yes. Yes, thank you. So, sorry, this is a comment from a resident of town who says they feel that 100 feet is insufficient as the no disturb zone and would like to see this expanded.
Now I get it.
That type of comment is something that we can consider for a future iteration, for discussion, for a future revision to the bylaw. That is a substantial change and is not something that we are currently open to discussing in this juncture.
Right, you'd want to do more.
I just want to publicly recognize
you'd
that.
want to do more research and,
Yes,
and build a consensus. For
Yes.
sure.
So I just for transparency, like all of the comments that we received via email, I have included in this document, and I want everyone to be heard, and that's the point of tonight. So I'm just raising that. It was noted. It will not be something that we change in this version of the bylaw.
They're referring to simply the general
The no disturb zone.
not
Right.
specific for anything.
No, just the general. Yeah. Okay, and then so there's another comment here, specific to vernal pools, on recognizing vernal pools recognizing the or adjacent to vernal pools based on an observed vernal pool activity. I think, to me, that reads as like expanding the definition of vernal pool to define a vernal pool that is an area that has observable vernal pool activity. I'm not sure if anyone else has.
Doesn't have the water? Is that what they're trying to say for the?
There's just a note suggest adding based on observed vernal pool activity.
So the problem with that would be the observation of vernal pool activity does not necessarily respect the hydro period, and so then you would be
Right.
Possibly,
You'd be
protecting a bunch of dead salamanders.
Right.
Right, you're protecting a puddle instead of a vernal pool.
Yeah.
Kind of, right.
But hydro periods are annoying too. That's a whole other.
So let's see. Another comment. With regard to no construction activity or removal of vegetative cover being allowed in the no disturb zone with the exception of contained organic composting areas, yeah, right there, leaves, grass, etc., within the resource area or the no disturb zone. The comment is that this may frustrate residents. Most bordering landowners currently violate this, while the Concom should find a way to enforce this, should this be in the bylaw or the regs.
In the second rendition, I give you an idea.
Yeah, well, the Concom, once you've made a decision on a property or conservation area, you have the right to go out and inspect it with 3 years or whatever, right? So you can make, notifications and go out and inspect and enforce if you need to.
We had a good amount of discussion about real small lots, et cetera, in these things. So that's still in discussion. And
Right, and there are a lot of people that do follow the rules.
Right.
And oftentimes when, I will say, we've had a few things coming before the COMCOM, Virginia can attest this, they've gone out to do some site visit for some other reason and said, you've got to remove all these leaves and brush you've dumped in the wetlands here, so.
We don't go in and yell at them, we just look. I know that leaves fall in the wetland, but you can't add to it. And suggest how to compost outside.
All right.
Instead, just.
So, riverfront area, section E, no comments. Vernal pools, no additional comments.
Whoa. You said no comment.
Issuance of conditions.
Virginia, do you have a comment on
Yes.
riverfront or vernal?
No, I had to do riverfront, because you said to wait until now.
Yes.
And
It's your time to shine, Virginia.
I know, as long as I can find my notes. Oh, dear. Oh, here it is. My notes on that. Well, I already said that the only places riverfront mentioned in our current regulations is referring to a buffer zone, and whether it's called an or, which it is not. All right, okay. Come on. This is the wrong one. Okay, well, I will wing it. All right. This one here, I felt that the entire thing is not in our regulations, so it shouldn't be here. However, it is an area that we have listed, and we have to have some type of comment on. And going into the bylaw, you need to say something. So
I think that's, just to clarify, I think that's if we define riverfront area differently than how it is defined in the WPA. Because we do state here the riverfront area as defined in the WPA, so that's why we don't have a definition of it.
well, as we all know, the regs, and I making the assumption on bylaw, is always going to contain the WPA in its regs, and then what we're doing here is access or added protection. So we can sort of assume that that will be there. Therefore, if it's there, I suppose we could still put the definition of riverfront area, excuse me, into our bylaw. It's not here. It's not here personally.
Right, and I don't think we need it. We don't need it.
Then I think we should take it out.
We don't have it.
Well,
The definition of riverfront area?
No, not now.
You're saying we
I'm
should take out this section?
Reference to it, I see what you're saying. Yeah, sorry, I was being a little bit slow.
But you want to mention that, you could go back to ORA, where
Yeah.
it defines what has an ORA and doesn't, and make sure that the riverfront is
Yeah.
added to that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that would correlate with, and you'd always have that connection for now. Easy.
I'm going to go back to what I said before about I don't want to do two different things.
Yeah,
What two beers would you?
Well, like if the bylaw permit, I have to explicitly excise riverfront area from my language. So if in a riverfront, I write the permit up for riverfront under the state, then when I write the matching permit under the bylaw, I've got to remember to go through the bylaw and pull out all the riverfront references.
No.
That just is making more work for me.
Well, at the moment, there won't be anything in there.
Right, that's what I mean. I'd have to, the thing that I would be building, I wouldn't be able to copy paste and issue two nearly matching sets of conditions. I'd have to excise the thing that isn't within my power
And then you'd have. two
under the
forms.
bylaw, you know, and so,
Well, you still have two different order of conditions. Usually they're,
right,
They
the
just-
cover
they
pages
just
are
differ
different,
from
not
heading,
the
right?
meat of the thing. Right, the meat of the thing usually match.
the way this is proposed right here, if you were to go just referring to riverfront like it currently is with the current regulations, then that eliminates.
Well,
any-
Virginia, but you don't gain anything by
Especially-
taking it out, and you make my job harder by taking this out. That's that would be the functional impact of
No,
removing that.
that-
You'd make
that-
my job harder.
No, it actually makes it easier.
No, because I'd be doing two different things in the same spot.
But riverfront area is still, well, or the riverfront and the 200 feet are still within jurisdiction.
yeah.
Right, under the WPA. in
Under your,
Virginia's.
under your bylaw, under the proposed bylaw.
Under the proposed bylaw.
Under section, under jurisdiction.
It isn't Virginia
but-
proposing to just remove
Yeah, but in our,
riverfront from
in
our
our
bylaw.
regulations, our current
Because
regulations,
it's no
not.
stricter than the WPA, Virginia's saying we should just eliminate reference to it.
99% of this is no stricter than the WPA. We've
I
got
would-
like,
I would
No,
keep
it's-
it, under section 3 jurisdiction.
Yeah,
You can consider removing E just because it is exactly.
there's no additional,
It tracks-
the same as the
It tracks the
WPA, right?
WPA
Yeah,
regs.
yeah.
So that will cut down on some language. You can get rid of this section.
okay,
But don't take it out of your jurisdiction.
okay.
It just
No, no.
makes it clearer to
No,
have it in
needs-
your jurisdiction.
in fact,
Yeah.
one of the last meetings, it was pointed out to me how the WPA is actually updated quite some time ago, I guess.
Yeah, 84, I
Information
think.
about how to handle the riverfront area
I think
in
the last ones
conjunction
are
with the
quick.
WPA.
I have to drive to Marsh.
Okay,
So no, you don't want to get rid of it.
all right, we are gonna keep moving. Thank you for that, though, Virginia, I think that was useful. All right, issuance of conditions, Let's see, comments here, just some minor phrasing comments. The only, there's a comment here on suggesting, and actually, Town Council, I do want your thoughts on this. I think, I have an opinion, but just in terms of, this is the section on issuance of conditions. There was a suggestion to remove the last clause of the last sentence, so it basically says, the commission may waive specially identified and requested procedures, design specs, performance standards, or others, provided that the commission finds in writing after the public hearing there are no reasonable considerations, alternatives, that avoidance, minimization, mitigation have been employed, blah, blah, blah. The key part here is to accommodate an overriding public interest, remove proposal, or to avoid a decision that so restricts the use of property as to constitute an unconstitutional taking without compensation.
So this is, this can be in regulations. This doesn't have to be necessarily in the bylaw, but this is standard language. It's essentially a variance. It's a waiver/variance language is what it is. And the part, the unconstitutional taking without compensation.
Yeah, that's the key question.
You know, that's perfectly fine. The difficult part about this, which again, I have numerous conservation commissions that have this language in their bylaw or their regs, is that the variance or the waiver is only allowed if there's an overriding public interest.
Thank you.
Which is very hard to prove.
Yeah.
So, but most of this, any waiver provision is usually in regulations.
Okay.
And having it in regulations, I do have a commission that recently did change their waiver language to take out the overriding public interest and change the language a little bit.
Okay, that's helpful. All right.
I just asked which paragraph that was in. It was above or below riverfront area.
The one that starts with due consideration shall be given to any demonstrated
it's-
hardship.
Yep.
It's the last sentence of
Page
that.
11?
Page 11. It's the first full paragraph.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
All right.
Sometimes I don't get the subject when you're about to talk, and yes, it is.
And then you're
Yeah, I
lost. Yeah, no,
apologize.
sorry about that.
No.
All right. Okay, so this term and duration of permit validity, so you'll note that we have changed this to align with the WPA. So it now, instead of saying 1 year, it says permits shall expire 3 years from the date of issuance.
But that's not in our old regs, so it
Correct.
shouldn't be there.
No, but we discussed as a commission that this is a useful change.
Yeah, it's useful, but it's a change.
We're not, yes, this is why, and I mean, Gordon, to your point, I think we recognized that the one-pager that we put out was confusing. It's very difficult to articulate the scope and scale of like how these changes affect things in one page. So we've not issued a one-pager that makes any statement that there is zero change to the bylaw. That is not possible. What we are saying is that we are not trying to make substantial changes to the commission's power. And Virginia, this is not a substantial change to the commission's power. Changing the permit timeline from 1 to 3 years, I think we've agreed is administratively to the benefit.
I agreed. I disagreed because I guess because I'm liberal, and when you tell me that we're going to put out something that is an update, or however you want to call it, bylaw, that will connect the current regs to that bylaw, and any change in wording, of course, is a lot is going to have to be done because it's not mentioned in bylaw. You have to write something with it in and to connect it. So things are going to change, but that's not a substantial change, and you're doing what is legally you need to do. But you said that's it.
Well,
Any other changes are going to happen later.
We discussed this as a commission at one of our meetings about whether we should keep it 1 year or change it to 3. And the majority of the commissioners felt that 3 years was a better
I
move.
agree 3 years is better, but I do not believe it should be in it. And I disagree respectfully with the other commissioners because they don't have the experience.
Okay, I mean, noted, understood. Yeah, that's,
So it's nothing,
Yep.
it's not a negative to it, it's just.
yeah. Any other comments, questions on that? All right, moving on.
It's definitely something we discussed about changing, it. We had to change the regs, let's get that done.
Let's see. Amendments to permits, there were no comments here. Regulations, there were no comments here. Burden of proof, no comments. Security, no comments. Enforcement. Okay, there was one comment here.
I have a comment on the 14 top,
Page 14?
page 14.
We're not quite there.
Section 11, which had already started on.
Yep, that starts on 13, yep.
We do use police officers to help us, sometimes with enforcement officers.
Yep.
We do that. But it's not mentioned at all in our regular bylaw, so, since it would actually be covered also by the fact that, municipal boards and offices actually cover the police, because the police department is part of our municipal boards and departments. I don't think we should mention the police in this one, but it should be in the later one.
So just to be clear,
So
yeah.
you need to be careful about that, because you cannot bind another department, particularly with negotiations.
Could I just get clarity then? Your suggestion would be,
To leave it as it, do
Leave it as it is.
not obligate the police to have to enforce your bylaw.
yeah,
Right, you can't do that.
You cannot do that legally.
okay.
The only other thing that, that I would just remind the commission is that under the second paragraph about private property, going on to private property, do not forget the last clause, which says, subject to the Constitution and the laws of the United States and the Commonwealth.
Yes.
So the Fourth Amendment does control, you cannot go on property without permission.
The commission fully knows that. 'cause
Yeah.
George has just left.
Our regulations referring
I'm
to
reminding everyone.
entering for violations.
I appreciate that.
It's my job,
It is in our
because I don't want my job to expand.
Yeah.
And there was actually a comment on this that was a suggestion from someone to add after that, under the laws of the United States and the Commonwealth, and regardless of if the permit is under appeal or not.
Yes. I don't,
At the moment,
I don't think it, yeah, you could add it, but it doesn't
I
matter.
mean,
Yep.
you need permission.
Yep.
at the moment, in the regulations, we have down about entering, and it specifies, that you have to get permission from the owner. So, I mean, the only time we would think to go on property is if it's, it has an open filing, or, it's in debate, or whatever.
Still can't do it.
Because we have it as a condition in
Still
our
can't do it.
our condition, because we sometimes need to do it, but down there is,
But you need permission,
from the owner.
yeah, yep.
And if the owner's not there, then you gotta you gotta talk to somebody about it, and then.
Right, you gotta give notice and
Yep.
get permission.
This language is in the Wetland Protection Act also.
Yeah, it's already there.
Yep.
Commonwealth put it in too, but.
Yeah.
All right, and so then appeals, nothing. Relation to the Wetlands Protection Act, no comments. Then in the waiver from regulations, there was a comment that there was a request that that first sentence be in the rules and regulations rather than in the bylaw. So the fact that waivers are not favored and will not be granted except in the most rare and unusual of circumstances.
So I'm sorry, I missed this during my review, but waiver from regulations shouldn't be in the bylaw, it should be in the regulations. This isn't a waiver from the bylaw, this is a waiver from regulations.
Bylaw has.
You're right, yeah, that's
The bylaw has.
true, actually, yeah.
I thought this terminology was.
So should that say waiver from
in the
bylaw, or do you not want to
Would-
waiver?
You can't have a waiver from the bylaw, in
can't
my
really.
Yeah.
understanding. You can waiver the regulations
Yeah.
because, like you said, there can be more fluid.
But
Right,
the bylaw grants the regs, so shouldn't the bylaw also sort of ungrant the regs? No?
No. If it's in the bylaw, it's like cement. You don't do it. But I thought it started from there because
I don't like making lawyers say,
you
that's,
can't,
That's a good point.
you can't add things in the regulations that's not already in the bylaw, with the exception that we elaborate on things that are in the bylaws.
does it.
But this is not an elaboration, this would be, it's pretty short and sweet, it says,
And then, yep, I would just say
and
waiver.
if it's in the bylaw, of course, there's no wiggle room. So I'm not sure how you can put in the bylaw and still reference it in the regs.
But I guess because the comment is that the fact that there are regulations that correspond to the bylaw is outlined in the bylaw. So the fact that there could be waivers to those regulations also needs to be articulated in the bylaw is the rationale. But your suggestion is that it should, the title for clarity would be better as waivers?
Yeah, I think just for the title, just for
Yeah.
clarity.
Waivers to the regulations, but actually, if you think about it, that's what you're actually asking for, because it's how you enforce the bylaws or what, and the others, how you do it. And a waiver would refer to wanting to do an actual action that isn't normally allowed.
Where's the regulatory section?
So maybe it shouldn't be in the bylaw, unless,
Section 8.
but then how do you enforce it if you don't have the bylaw reference?
Right.
I don't have the answer.
Can we just change section 8 to just say, you know, so like copy paste this to be below section 8?
Section 8?
Yeah, included as a part of the regulations.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because section 8 grants
You're going back to
regulations.
section 8?
Yeah, so basically
Yeah.
tying together the
That way
waiver.
it's
Yeah.
answered right after if you have
Yeah.
an unusual circumstance, right? You don't have to read through the whole, I mean, you're
Yeah.
gonna read through it anyway, but at least makes
Yeah.
it,
Right, so we grant it the waiver,
Yeah.
so we grant regulatory authority, and then we say regulatory authority can be waived,
Yeah.
not waived, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so it becomes subsumed as a part of
Right,
regulations. Okay.
we step it down.
We have things like the applicant asking for something unusual because of a hardship with the property or something like that all the time.
Yeah.
And we do have wiggle room. We do.
Gordon Glass, I see you have a comment.
Hi, thank you. I believe this will be my last comment for
Yep.
the evening. I think
No, I know you, yeah, thanks for
commenting.
commenting. I know this was an item that you guys had flagged.
I hope people can.
Yeah, so I think in short, kind of the position that I've been raising here tonight is that this is this proposed bylaw is extremely stringent. It's additionally buoyed by some provisions that seemingly expand the commission's jurisdiction beyond check and control, some seemingly arbitrary power provisions that certainly need to be revisited. The bylaw itself is expanding the commission's jurisdiction and authority to raise new burdens for all the residents in the town. And then in addition to just that general fact, there are certain provisions that we flagged this evening that seemingly take that authority to arbitrary grounds, dangerous in terms of lawsuits and in terms of unfettered commission discretion to burden the town residents and taxpayers. I'd wrap up here by saying when you look at a bylaw that stringent, and you look at these controls that are being proposed in the bylaw, a waiver provision like this that renders it practically impossible for the overwhelming majority of applicants to receive a waiver, layered onto an incredibly stringent bylaw with some very questionable proposed provisions, expand the commission's jurisdiction. That's just something that needs to be revisited and reconsidered unless the goal from the town here is to grant the commission sweeping authority and to make it very, very difficult for average everyday project proponents, home improvement projects, to have any control to get any flexibility out of the commission from what I would say is an inadvisably stringent and expansive bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. To be clear, none of that is the commission's goal in doing any of this revision, but I appreciate that perspective. Town Council, I want to offer you the chance to comment if you have any comments.
No, I guess my only comment would be that, that this is, it's a very common bylaw.
Thank you.
Look inside.
All right. We've reached the end, actually, of all of the comments that have been provided to us. We are only 45 minutes over time. I know Town Council has a long drive ahead of her, so.
And I did a last-minute amendment to the agenda just in case.
We don't have a quorum, yeah.
Yeah, but
So this
We have a
is, this was,
subcommittee.
no, this was an information meeting, so this doesn't count as having it to be ratified. It has to be ratified at the next meeting, which would be on the 27th.
Quorum anyway, but.
No.
But
the
this was
select
only
board
an
has quorum.
informational session, it wasn't a meeting.
I just mean while you're here, is anything
All right, well, on that note, I think, I just want to thank everyone. There are 10, oh, yeah.
If I can just, if Jamie and Tom are still here, I would entertain a motion from one of you when Lauren grants you the mic to motion to adjourn, and we'll adjourn.
And I was out there and I
Yep,
found.
you guys can
I
speak.
went out like 15 acres downstream.
Tom or Jamie, you want to make a motion to adjourn if you're still awake?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry.
Perfect. Jamie, you want to second that?
Wake up.
This was a select board meeting. We got a quorum of select board.
Yeah. Yep.
We don't have a quorum of Concom.
No, that's okay.
Jamie,
That works.
going once, going twice.
Hi, sorry, I thought I was on. I seconded it, but you didn't hear me.
Thank you, Jamie. And then a roll call. We'll start with Tom, and then Jamie,
Tom Myers, aye.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
and myself, Sean Farrell, aye. Thank you, other select board members, for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
thank
everybody
you.
else appreciate
Thank
it
you
as
very
well.
much. All right,
Nice,
well,
nice job, Concom. Good work. Thanks.
thank you. I'll close the meeting, we don't have a quorum anymore.
No, you don't have
We'll
to.
just Irish goodbye.
Just say thanks.
Pull the laptop.
Softly.
Yeah, just
Mic drop.
We don't have a quorum?
No, we got Deb on the line somewhere, but that's only 3.
Yeah.
The bylaws.
Oh,
I didn't
that's
even
right.
see.
Yeah.